We'll find out.
Yeah, someone will tell you.
Yep. We see 0 people in the chat. Like, just everyone abandoned me. Just my entire channel just unsubscribed yesterday. It's like, is the sound good? Question.
Were you being sarcastic just then?
Yeah. Like, if that happened, like, if I opened the chat and just literally no one came in, I'm like, wait a minute, where are all my followers? What happened to them? They're just all unsubbed.
I see. I thought you were saying that. You have been talking about some controversial stuff lately, so I wasn't sure.
Yep. It's definitely an interesting take, since the pro woke side is definitely really common. And I think that there are lots of fallacious arguments in what they use. Definitely not opposed to their goals, but I think their arguments, or some of them, are really terrible.
Yeah. I guess I have mixed views about that, but certainly I think the area, I don't want to talk, I mean, we could talk about that, I guess, if you want to, but I guess the area where we agree on that is that you should be allowed to talk about these issues and have the position that you have without being canceled or like called a hateful name. But even though I don't necessarily agree, I don't think of myself as woke, because I have such mixed, complicated feelings, because I'm like an old school, like I love free speech, but I also, like, I'm an old white guy, so I understand that there are things that I don't get, and that listening to people with different experiences is good. And if they say you're doing something that we don't like, then I should pay attention to that. So I think we're in this generation that's coming up is struggling with this age-old question about free speech and harm, and it's not an easy road. So they're learning. I don't think there's anything new in what's going on. This has been going on for a long time. It's just, I think people's attitudes about free speech are changing a little bit. And that's, we'll have to see how it plays out. Certainly in my experience as a teacher, I've seen attitudes, because I taught my first class in the year 2000. So, 20 years of teaching. Not consistent. I was a graduate student back then, didn't know what I was doing, but still, I was talking to people that were younger than me and stuff like that. So I've seen attitudes change on these kind of issues. Privacy being another one, which, my generation, we thought privacy was a big deal. And now younger people seem to care less about it, and they put everything on Instagram anyway. So anyway, it's complicated stuff, but it's interesting to see it unfold, and I'm for the discussion. I'm more interested in hearing the different sides than I am in being a reactionary, but I also, whatever, I'm rambling.
That's totally fine. Like, definitely my position is more, I want to take the more saucy positions, because I want to see if I can do that without being demonized, essentially. Because I think that's the worst part, is that people can't disagree and without being demonized. And I think that's a fault with the woke community. That's like the only thing I don't agree with them on. I think their motives are perfectly fine. Like, my morality agrees with most of what they say, even the part where they say that sentences and positions themselves can be evil. I mean, I tend to lean that way too, in a bit of a way, but the demonizing people who disagree seems very bad. Seems like a very bad ideology.
I mean, you've got to, I don't know. Anyway, so it's complicated.
Anyway, how have you been? How was your school year been?
I've been good. I've been very good. Busy, very busy. One semester ended, another semester started, so I'm back into summer school and whatnot. Hanging out. How about you? Just been debating a lot of stuff?
Yep, the normal, trying to get back in shape.
I just played through Demon Souls again. I finally got my PS5, so
Oh, nice.
Speaking of demons, all this demon talk.
The new one, the remake?
Yeah.
Have you got the final armor at the end?
I'm not, no. No.
There's the one where you have to complete like 13 playthroughs or something to collect all the coins to unlock the secret armor.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I didn't do that. I did play through. I mean, I played through. I don't do stuff like that. I'm not like in GTA. I don't complete every quest, and I only found out afterwards that there was all this weird underground alien shit in GTA. Like, I didn't really even know about that because I didn't explore all that stuff. But anyway.
So philosophy stuff. Let's talk about logic.
Yeah, man. Let's talk about logic. So I wanted to ask you, because you say some cavalier things about logic, actually, which I don't know you can really back up, to be honest with you. So, for example, I've heard you say things like, by the way, for the record, because I know I'm going to get dragged. I already see people dragging me in the comments, which I don't care about. But just for the record, we agree on a lot of stuff, obviously. So I am here to just have a conversation and challenge you, but not because I have some like deep-seated passion against your position in life or anything like that. As we've talked about before, I'm mostly an atheist. I'm an agnostic about some like abstract question about, is there a creator, where that could include like, are we in a simulation, or is there some kind of morally perfect being, whatever. But I'm straight up atheist about any normal religion, man-made religion. So just in case people later are like, is this guy a pantheist? No, he's not. So we agree on all that stuff. But where we don't agree on is that I don't think it's all such an easy, that everything falls into place so easily. So for example, with the case of logic, so you've said in various debates and discussions you've had that it's pretty easy. Reality is reality, A equals A. And that you get basically logic from something like that, from something simple like that. So before we start, is that your position?
Yeah, more or less. That how like logic is a language.
I'm reading the comments, by the way. I don't care.
They're by the way, they're not insulting
or
you.
Have a beer.
So those aren't insults. Those are compliments, just so you know.
Sure.
So I mean, like,
they don't bother me.
Well, our community is kind of is 420 positive, so we're totally okay with that.
Cool.
But yeah, so my view is that
I'll argue you, so don't worry.
big claims. So yeah, logic is a language invented by humans, and that we can derive logic from looking at reality. I don't think logic exists in any metaphysical sense. It's just a descriptive language, and that we came up with it just like we did English, essentially. But I think that logic does describe something more fundamental, which is the way reality operates in some way. And so I think there is something about reality that we are describing, which is the way it is. And we are simply attempting to describe that through our use of language, and that's how we come up with logic.
Right. Okay. But so first of all, let's just see what you think about this distinction. So suppose that you wanted to make a distinction between what you might call a logic with a lowercase a and a lowercase l, and then what you might call logic with a capital L. So everybody agrees, by which I mean logicians, you, me, regular people, I guess even, that the lowercase logics are a man-made language, an artificial language that we construct, and we make various choices about how to put them together and blah, blah, blah. But that's a very different claim than saying that logic is a man-made, man-constructed language. So there's no evidence for that you've presented. So certainly, like, for example, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy says a logic is a artificial language. Yeah, that's a, lowercase l type of logic. So to see that there's a difference between these, this is, you can kind of see, suppose someone gives you an axiom like A equals A or whatever. It could be modus ponens, like from if P then Q and P infer that Q, etc. Could be any kind of logical rule or axiom that you like. What are you going to do with it? Well, you got it.
Well,
you have to.
Just a question: like, is there any reason to think that logic itself is somehow different from a logic? Is there some fundamental difference there?
Yeah. So I was just giving you one.
Oh, okay.
Or I was trying to get you to start to think about maybe why there might be a difference there. So this is really like comes from thinking about work from Saul Kripke, who is a famous logician or whatever, but I'm not saying that means he's right, but I'm just trying to get you to think about this issue, which is as follows. So take a certain logical rule like universal instantiation, which is a basic rule which says, if you know that all of the A's are B's, and if this particular thing falls under the group of the A's, then infer, that it's a B, right? So if you know that all dogs are mammals and that this particular thing is a dog, then you should be able to infer from that this particular thing is a mammal. right? You're with me so far?
Yep.
That's your, okay. So suppose that you met somebody who agreed with you like that all dogs are mammals. And then you said, okay, so I have a dog. His name is Fido. Is he a mammal? And this person says, I don't know. I've never met Fido before. Okay, so has this person made a mistake?
Potentially, yes.
Potentially how?
Well, if we define dogs in such a way that all dogs are mammals and we're using the same meaning of the words in this context, then it would be a reasonable inference that if this person or if this dog, Fido, does meet that definition, then it would also, by definition, be a mammal.
Right. But we're talking about a person, so we're not talking about like in reality whether the dog is a mammal or not. We're talking about what's rational for a person to conclude based on some evidence. So this person, you say all dogs are mammals. This person says, yes, I agree. You say, my dog at home is named Fido. Is it a mammal? This person says, I don't know. I've never met your dog. So you would likely respond by saying, but I just told you that all dogs are mammals. To which this person might say, yeah, sure. I know. I agree. You told me all dogs are mammals. I agree. And then you would say, right. And they'd say, and so what? You might say, well, and so my dog at home, Fido. And they'd say, I don't know. I've never met your dog. I just told you. Now, this is an adaptation of a kind of case that Kripke actually gives. He gives a slightly different version. So this is an original with me. I just kind of made up the dog part of it. But the idea is that in order to get from the claim that all dogs are mammals to believing that Fido is a mammal, you have to sort of recognize that Fido is an instance of the general claim. So you have to be able to use this kind of general rule or this thing that we've been talking about, universal instantiation. You have to be able to know that the general rule implies all of its instances. So at first, before we sort of go on to the next step here, what do you think about so far where we're at?
Sure, I think I'm following.
Okay. All right. So this person then, if they don't recognize that the dog is an instance of the universal statement, then they won't make the inference. And they haven't done anything wrong, logically speaking. They just don't know how to recognize when a certain version of a rule applies or not. All right, so that's the general setup, I guess. And then the punchline here is supposed to be, well, suppose that, you never had made any kind of inference of the kind that we're talking about from a general statement, universally quantified statement to a particular instance. Suppose you had never done that before. Could anyone teach you how to do that? Could anyone teach you how to make that kind of inference? And the argument here suggests no, they couldn't, because in order to make that sort of inference, you would have to be able to do the thing which you disagree with me you would have to do, which is to recognize when the rule applies, which would already require that you understand the rule. So that there's no way to really, there's different ways you could put it, but there's no way to really codify in a formal language what it is that we are doing when we make those kinds of inferences. That's the general line. That's the general argument, which suggests that you can't just start with some axioms like A equals A, because you need a system, you need to reason with those axioms, you need to infer things from them. And we do that already. And that's not a matter of an artificial language or this lowercase logic something. This is something else, which the sort of arguments that you typically bring against logic don't bear on. You don't have anything. Anyway, so let me stop and ask you what you think about what we've been saying so far.
Yeah, there's two things there. One is that I don't see a problem with teaching people that. Like, I see it perfectly reasonable to think that as animals evolve or humans evolve, there's going to be some point where they think Fido is a dog and they can recognize all dogs are mammals, but they don't recognize Fido as a mammal. They can't make that connection yet with just a lack of intellectual capability, and then you give them more intellectual capability.
No. That was the warm-up problem, though.
Yeah.
So that's not the actual problem. The actual problem is that what they would have to so the person who's never made that kind of inference, if you told them that all dogs are mammals, and therefore asked them about Fido, they wouldn't even know that that was a situation in which the rule applied. So you wouldn't ever be able to get them to recognize that the rule is the reason they should be doing what they're doing. Well, so certainly you could train them to make these inferences, but you couldn't get them to understand it.
Well, I don't see a connection between those two things. So I can grant, so they've never done this kind of inferential reasoning before, but I don't think it follows that you can therefore never teach them how to do it. I don't see a connection.
How would you do it then?
Oh, I'd see it just like anything in a video game. That's something you've never done before. You'd make some kind of an analogy to something else you have done before, and then just extend the analogy. So if you imagine this like a universal instantiation property thing, you break it down into parts and you take each part and compare it to something else that the same part exists in. And then once you have those other three things, if you imagine the universal instantiation thing requires three parts, you can take each part and find where this person does each of the parts individually, and then combine those three ideas, and you could potentially teach them how to.
What are the three things that you need to combine?
I have no idea. I'm just hypothetically speaking that if this method of taking an instance and saying that you need to do some universal instantiation thing to it, I would still be potentially.
But you're not getting the problem here, really, though. I'm probably not expressing it well because of said bakedness and all that stuff we were discussing earlier, but. The idea is that in order to apply the rule of universal instantiation, you have to recognize that some universal So here's a better way to put it. The rule of universal instantiation says every universal statement implies all of its instances. Okay. So in order to understand that rule, you have to recognize something as a universal statement and understand that it implies all of its instances. In other words, you have to have the rule already.
Well, couldn't you just remove the universal part and say there's a box that has things in it, and this object A is one of the things in the box, and then extrapolate from that? Okay, so now we're going to make this into a universal. There is a box of all things called reality, and all things in reality are in this box. And so, like, you can imagine a kid understanding there are things in the box, but he wouldn't be able to understand the universal of what this would imply is just a particular box, and doesn't understand anything about universals, and can follow the connection between object A is in the box, therefore it's a set of things in the box. And from this, you could then start adding in an extra property of like the universal scopeness to it, how it applies to all things. All dogs is like a category of box, and Fido is in the box. And you might be able to teach them about universal instantiation that way without using universals.
But how? So suppose that you, just to simplify it because there's too many dogs, suppose you have 10 tiles that are squares of different colors, red and orange and yellow, etc. So you have my friend over here who's never made any kind of universal inference. So you show them the squares. You say, look at all these squares. Each one has a color. So you pick up all the red ones. And you put them, you say, this square is red, you put it into a bag. You say, this square is red, you put it into a bag. And you end up putting n number of red squares into the bag. And then, so you say, you shake them up and you say, I'm going to pick one of these out. Is it going to be red? And we have no reason to expect that this person will say anything other than, how am I supposed to know? I haven't seen you pick it out yet. And you say, yeah, but all of the squares in the bag are red. And they might say, yeah, I know, I saw you put them all in there, right? They're all red. So you say, well then, right, so the one, I'm going to pull one out, it's going to be red, right? And the person, how would I know? Because to even make that inference, you have to recognize that what you're being presented with, all the squares in the bag are red, is a universal instance. Is a universal statement, and therefore will imply all of its instances. So you have to be able to apply the universal instantiation rule to the sentence, all the squares in the bag are red, or to the thought or whatever. So to apply the rule, you need to understand the rule.
Well, to me, it seems exactly analogous to what happens with kids when they're like in a room and you tell them don't eat the cookie or whatever, and you leave the room and see if they eat the cookie. I mean,
Yeah.
in those similar cases, the kid literally just can't understand at some age that there is another person that's actually watching you. Like, I think they put a doll in the room and they like say, the doll is watching you, don't eat the cookie. And the person just can't grasp that the doll has any consciousness. And then at some age, they now have this ability to instantiate, oh, there's a consciousness there and it's watching me. And so I should be bad to do this. And I don't see a difference between those two.
The difference is that, so it depends on what the question is. So the whole thing, remember, that I'm trying to get you to think about is this claim that you make often, that you can kind of start from reality and then get logic.
Yeah, I
you
think
can kind
that
of
was
start from reality is reality, and then the rest is just a language that we make up or whatever to capture something out there, this thing called reality being reality. And that's what I'm trying to press you on, is that certainly there is something that is that. That's the little L logic. But there's this other thing that we do called reasoning. And it's not clear that any formal system actually captures what it is that we do when we do that, because of the kind of problem that I'm trying to present right now, which is that any formal system that anyone ever gives you, you have to use it. You have to reason with it. So the reasoning has to come first. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't train like an animal to do universal instantiation, or, you know, this guy that we're calling Romina Padro calls him Harry, this imaginary person that we're talking about, who has never done universal instantiation before. So you could certainly just condition him by giving him a cookie every time he says the right thing. So if you say, like, you know, or is Fido a mammal? If he says yes, you can give him a cookie, or you smile or whatever. And then over time, eventually he'll answer you in the right way. And then he'll acquire the practice of inferring in a certain way and a habit or whatever. But he won't ever come to understand what he's doing on the basis of understanding the rule. So that there's something, there's more to it than merely the artificial language, the formal language. There's the using of it, the knowing what to do with it, the reasoning.
Right. I think that goes into the second part, because I said there was two parts I wanted to respond to. So when I say logic is a language, we obviously start with some ability to rationalize. Like, I see stuff. I see there is a camera, there is a TV. So the ability to rationalize is already there. And logic is just the language we make up to describe that thing that we're doing. So I'm not saying that the rationalization...
So that's what I'm saying, though, is that... because here's another way to put the point. So could we change the logic that we have? Because sometimes, you know, like I teach logic, and we teach, you know, truth values and truth tables and propositional logic, predicate logic, all, you know, basic first order logic or whatever, pretty basic stuff actually. But it makes a lot of assumptions, like there's only two truth values. All right, so some people think you could have more than two truth values, like you could have true and false. You could also have neither true nor false. You could have both true and false. There's also fuzzy logic, which says you could have any real number as a truth value between 0 and 1, where 0 is like false and 1 is true. So you got 0.5 true and 0.7, 8, 3, 6, 9, 8, 2, 4, 0, 1, 3, 2, 1, 8, 8% true, whatever. So those are logics in the lowercase L sense. But some people have made the claim that, well, you know, we might find empirical evidence that we should abandon classical logic in favor of one of these other kinds of logic. I don't think it's the right way to do it, but some people have said, well, what about quantum mechanics? So if quantum mechanics goes a certain way, then maybe we should say that some things both are a particle and a wave at the same time and admit a third truth value and go to non-classical logic, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So if logic is just, you know, a language that we make up, we could pick whichever one we want. But it doesn't seem like you can really do that, because in order to use the formal system that you adopt, you've got to do this thing that you already agree with me that you do beforehand, the reasoning part. And the way that most people would think about logic that I would talk to would say, what we write down, the theories we write down, what we're trying to capture is that thing we're doing, not the stuff out there. Maybe Aristotle thought logic was about the external world, but nowadays logic, if it's about anything, is about reasoning. It's about the rational ability. It's about what follows from what. It's about what we in the logic business call logical consequence, which is the idea of something following from something else logically. So the thing that you think you're trying to describe is with this artificial language or whatever, is the very thing that everyone else is asking you for an explanation of. And you say, basically, yeah, I can describe it. And I'm not saying that please don't, I'm not a precept or, you know me, I'm not one of those guys. But I do think there's a question here about what logic is, what reasoning is, and whether it can be captured in a purely formal system or not, that you can't sort of just say A equals A and do away with. That was basically, but it sounds like maybe you agree, but now how far
so my argument that logic is a language doesn't say anything about ontology. So I don't say anything about what reasoning is, what I am, what my brain is. I don't know any of those things. I don't answer any of those things. I just know I exist and I experience stuff, and I don't know why. I don't know how. I just know I am, and then I create language to describe that. So the logical language, like you said, is us trying to describe how we're reasoning. We're trying to attempt to do that. So the logic is the language describing the thing in reality that we're doing, whatever that is. So there would still be something in reality we're trying to describe with this logical language, which is our ability to reason or whatever. And my argument,
sorry, you go ahead, finish.
My argument doesn't say anything about where that came from. It doesn't presuppose or answer what our reasoning is fundamentally. It's not meant to.
But if that's the case, then I don't really see, or maybe I'm just misunderstanding your position, which is possible. I thought that, so in answer to the precepts or whatever, because a typical precept, as I understand their position, which I learned that word from you because I didn't know about this whack ass view.
You'd never heard of Van Til and Bonson? Oh, terrible philosophy.
I really haven't. But the basic idea that, because I went and looked it up a little bit, not too much, but enough to sort of know that, it's really wild. The basic idea is, which starts off from a serious question, actually, I would say, it just veers off in a very strange way of answering. But the serious question, and that's sort of what prompted me to say we should talk about this, was the serious question, which I think is there, is, okay, so universal instantiation, that's something which we try to describe what we're doing. That's what you were just saying. So we think it's good to infer from the claim that all A's are B's to the claim that every A is a B, like this A is a B and that A is a B, etc. We think it's good to infer from if P then Q and P to Q, and also either P or Q and not P to Q, etc., etc. There's also these things that we think are very good. But the question is why? Why are they good? Why is universal instantiation good? And this really comes out when you start to think about what are called perverse instantiations, which are other rules which may be implemented. There was a famous one which someone called modus morons, which I always thought was hilarious. It's not exactly politically correct to say modus morons, but instead of modus ponens, remember there's modus tollens and modus ponens. Now, what about modus morons? Well, modus morons basically is the argument pattern that says from P, if P then Q, and P infer not Q. So, that seems like you think that's a bad rule. You think it's logically invalid. So what if you meet someone who thinks that's a good rule, who thinks that it's logically valid? Why is modus ponens better than modus morons? What about a perverse instantiation of universal instantiation itself from the claim that all A's are B's, infer that each instance isn't a B? So from the claim that all dogs are mammals, infer that this dog isn't a mammal and that dog isn't a mammal. And why not? So clearly we do it one way and not the other way. But the question is, what justifies, where do the rules come from? Why are those the good ones? And simply saying it's a language that we made up just doesn't answer that question or even take it seriously as a question. Now, I'm not going to say that those things come from some supernatural God who says, let it be thus, but there's got to be something, or at least you should say something about those sorts of things. You can't just take it as obvious that the way we do it is the good way for no reason, or so it seems to me. So
yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
Okay, you do. Okay.
Yeah. So I say that there is a language of logic that accurately describes reality. We don't know what that is. I assume it's standard logic. So I think the reason we do it this way is because this accurately reflects reality. I think that reality is what causes this to be this way. There's some feature of reality, like kind of how the precepts say there's some feature of God that causes reason to be this way. I think there is some feature of reality that causes reason to be this way. And our description, our language is trying to map onto that as best as we can. And I think that...
But that doesn't answer the question.
Okay, which part is the question? Because
because it depends on what's the reality here. So if you mean reality, mind-independent external reality, then we already agreed that's not what logic is describing. If you mean mental, well, because what logic describes is rationality, what's rational, what it is to infer one thing from another, what it means for something to, given that one thing is true, what you should believe or what you can know or expect or whatever, however you want to define it, the consequence, logically speaking, of the claim that this proposition is true downstream. So that is, now you might say, look, reality is out there and it would be nice if the way we reasoned matched up with it, but that's a separate claim and you can't just connect them. Because like, for example, the modus moron stuff in the perverse instantiation business, that could be going on in a world just like this one. And it may even be the case that accidentally it's very beneficial for you to reason in this way. But the question is, why is that the right way? Why is it good? Why is it correct or true to say that? Well, you can't use those words because they describe the object language, meta language, whatever. But the argument form modus ponens, why is it valid? Why does it have to be valid? What makes it the case? And you can't just say reality. Reality doesn't make modus ponens valid. Or at least I don't see how you've made that argument.
Well, yeah, there's a disconnect there for me because that's, I think truth is that which corresponds to reality. So if an argument is valid, that means that the way that argument works corresponds to the way reality is. So the structure of valid arguments and what makes them good is the fact that reality itself operates in that way. So
yeah, but see the problem, this may be actually the problem, maybe not the problem, but it could be a problem in this area because how to put this, rationality, logic, those terms are normative. They tell you what you should do. They're ought claims. Modus ponens says, reason like this, dummy, if P then Q and P implies Q. So if you have those two, you ought to take Q from these things. They are commands in a sense. They are shoulds, they are oughts, they are normative. They don't describe necessarily the way things are, but how they should be, not because people don't abide by modus ponens perfectly. Obviously, we're imperfect reasoners, but the claim is that we should, and that when you do, it's good. You reason well, and when you don't, it's bad. You reason poorly, and those are the claims that need to be justified. And saying reality doesn't do that.
I don't know if I'm following here. So I would say that the reason you use logic in one way, or what makes it good, is that if you can use that system or that language to infer accurate things about reality, then that's why you should use one logic over the other. And so if you could use a paraconsistent or non-standard logic, and that would give you more or better access to reality, like the people you mentioned earlier who said maybe there's testable predictions that we could adopt a new logic, then that would then change it. And so we shouldn't use logic in the normal way.
Yeah, but the whole point I've been making is that you can't adopt a new logic. That's the whole point of the argument. And you haven't really addressed it. So that
that's possibly true. Like, so maybe my logic, whatever logic I'm using, is determined by my brain, but I don't see how that would change anything. I'd still say there is some logic that corresponds to reality, some logic that accurately describes the way reality is, something that can accurately be used to tell us about reality. I may or may not have access to that. It doesn't make a difference to me one way or the other to my argument. I'm just saying there is reality and some logic describes reality accurately. And whether or not I have that doesn't make a difference to my argument. I don't see why my ability...
What reality is logic describing?
I don't understand the question.
You said there is some reality, and as long as the logic describes it, then it's good.
Yeah, I'm talking about like the mind-independent external reality thing. If there's no minds, there is a language that could accurately describe that thing.
So take the axioms that govern identity in first order logic. Says, for all x, if x is f, then x is g. For all x, x equals x. For all x, if x equals x, then necessarily it's the case that x equals x. Okay, so those are some of the axioms that govern the way we use identity in first order logic. Seems like there was a big debate over that third one that I just said, namely that for all x, if x equals x, then necessarily it's the case that x equals x. And there were philosophers who denied that and said, no, in fact, it's not. David Lewis was one of the most famous one of these philosophers who said, no, the possible worlds that exist, they're real. That's called modal realism.
Ontic modal
Those
realism?
worlds are just as real as this world, so that there are plenty of cases where x fails to be x necessarily. As for instance, in the case where TJump is not a YouTube philosopher star person, but rather is an XFM radio personality. In that possible world, you aren't there. The counterpart of TJump is there. The qualitatively indistinguishable but not identical duplicate of you on this modally real possible world. So, okay, so now who's right? What do we say about this axiom of identity? What's reality? I mean, so what should you infer from the claim that x equals x or that a equals a? Which of these axioms should you accept, should you invoke? And even if you accept them, what should you do with them once you accept them? Just saying description, reality, it's not answering the question.
Well, wouldn't those be mutually exclusive claims, and one of them would potentially be true about reality and one of them would potentially be false about reality, and so there is actually an answer there, even if we can't know it?
Yes, but the question is which you should accept and what it's rational to infer on the basis of a given claim. So that's why I keep telling you that what's real and why what's out there is kind of a red herring and missing the point of the discussion. Because what you're going to say is, look, let's just suppose David Lewis is right. Let's just stipulate God comes down and says, hey, dudes, fuck all of you guys. Modal realism is true. And we're like, damn it. So close. almost had that one. But no. Okay, so all right. Just imagine that scenario. Okay. So in that world, I take it what you're going to say is that, yeah, the axiom that says that for all x, if x equals x, then necessarily x equals x is false. And therefore, that axiom should be rejected.
Yeah.
Should.
Sure.
Should.
Yes, should be rejected because it's not
Ought
true.
to be rejected.
Yes.
Aha. So now there are some creatures in said world who don't reject that axiom, and they reason in various ways and so forth and so on. And you say they're making a mistake, they're getting something wrong, they should be doing something different.
Sure.
Yeah, so lots of oughts.
Sure.
Lots of shoulds.
Well, I mean,
that's the point. So it's not descriptive, it's normative. It's about what you should do, not what is the case. So what you're saying is you should do what is the case, which you would have to justify as an ought claim in and of itself. So you haven't justified that. You're simply
I'm not quite following here. So I'd use the Kant's hypothetical versus categorical imperative. I say, if you want to describe reality, then you ought to do X. But I don't think there's like a categorical imperative implied in logic that they like are objectively obligated to do this. They can adopt whatever logic they feel happy with, and I'm fine with that. I wouldn't say that there's some objective law of nature that they're violating by not doing that, and they ought to not do that, violate that objective law of nature. I'd say that just the hypothetical imperative, like as someone who wants to have my beliefs correspond to reality as much as possible, if you have that belief, then you ought to do X. Then you ought to adopt the logic that does.
Right. Okay. And then what happens in the case where you don't know, like is the case here?
pick the one you like the best. Like, I'm not sure. Like, I don't understand the argument here, the question. Like, if you don't
Well, I don't
know,
understand what you don't understand. So you say that there is reality and you ought to accept the logic which correctly describes reality.
yeah, make your best guess. Like, if you feel like that one describes reality and that guy feels like that one describes reality and there's no way to determine between which one, just pick your favorite.
But how do you not see that that's inconsistent with everything that you said earlier in this discussion?
What do you mean? How would that be inconsistent?
Because,
Because I mean, ontologically, one is right and one is wrong. And so if we can know with 100% certainty this one's right, then you ought to go with that one. But if you don't know, like if anything we don't know, like in the case of any of my moral dilemmas where I don't know the answer, you just make the best guess you can.
So look, we reason in a certain way, right?
Yep.
So there's no doubt about that. There is a certain sort of way that human beings reason in. I mean, another example of this exact same thing is in economic theory, where they have the Homo rationalis or whatever, that fictional version of human beings that bases their beliefs based on evidence and conditionalizes and on prior probabilities and all that fucking nonsense that no one does. So if we were to describe like what people actually do, then, is modus ponens a good description of what people actually do? I don't know. There's the Watson selection task. There's all sorts of things that seem to suggest that people are not very good. Do you know about the Watson selection task?
Mm-hmm.
If I ask you, like, if you ask the typical person, you say you have some cards, there are some numbers on one side and some letters on the other side. And if the number is even on one side, then there's a vowel on the other side. So you tell people that, and you show them some cards, and you ask them which cards they would flip over to see if this thing I said earlier were true. So
yes, I do.
People are really bad about.
Yeah, I remember
really bad at doing that.
Yeah, definitely. I remember some YouTube videos where they did that, trying to actually figure out what would the least cards that it would take to figure out if the cards followed the rule or not, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And people are but really it's just, if you know logic, if you know logic the way it's taught in school, then it should be very easy, because conditional statements are true when the antecedent is true and the consequent is true, and they're false when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. So the cards that verify, are the ones that you want to flip over, are the ones that you test what happens when the antecedent's true. Is the consequent false or not? Which just clearly tells you which cards you should. But people don't do that. But they do it in the if you give them an example that makes sense, like if you're carding people, if you have to be 21 to drink, and then you blah blah. So they get it right there. So then people say maybe they're just not really good at this formal abstract thing this theoretical thing that we've developed, and said that reason consists in applying these formal rules. But anyway, so the point is that if you want to say what's real is that people reason like that. So according to you, modus morons, that might be the actual true logic.
Yeah, it might be. So I wouldn't rule out
but
any.
That's crazy. Come on.
I grant dialetheism and pair consistent logics are possible. I think they're not possible.
Of course they're possible, but that's so look, that's again just the whole point that I've been trying to make. You're sidestepping it.
I don't know if I'm following the point here, because from my perspective, it's the same thing as science. Trying to figure out what the right logic is the same thing as trying to figure out does science describe reality? Could we be in the matrix? Could everything be wrong? Yes. But we go with the best we can, which is obviously what we have. So Our brains work in a certain way, and it seems to work decently well as far as we can tell. So it's good to go with that we have a good reason. Like, what's that silly argument the theists make all the time, that any direct experience we have is reasonable to believe as long as there's no defeater provided, or something like that. So the fact that we have this and it works gives us some reason to adopt the logic that we're using, whatever it is.
But how can we adopt the logic?
It starts in our brain. We start with it.
Okay, so it sounds like what you're saying is that you don't really ever think that we use logic, actually. That it's just, there are habits that we have. So the question that I'm trying to pose is a question about how could you ever come to be guided by the rules of logic? what you call adopting a logic? Or how could you ever like make an inference if someone said, here is a rule, you should follow it? So that's why Kripke was inspired by reading Wittgenstein and the rule following, if you know the history of all this crap. That's where this all starts from, because Kripke was reading Wittgenstein and saying, oh, yeah, I guess I don't want to copy or mimic Kripke. He's a nice guy. But anyway, he was saying, yeah, so this rule following business actually points to created a problem for him that is now known as the Kripkenstein paradox or whatever, which is sort of what I've been trying to loosely present in this discussion here. But the problem is that to adopt the logic, so if you want to just investigate what's out there and then try to figure out what logic you should adopt, that sort of approach that you're taking, which I guess is sort of a kind of Quinian in this philosophy, at least in that genre, then you could do that if what you're saying is, look, it's sort of just like what Hume said. We're not really rational, and it's just classical conditioning, basically, all the way down. And reason paints this picture of us being all, understanding inferences and feeling rationally compelled and seeing motive. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I think about modus ponens, I feel like compelled. I feel forced. I feel like pushed. So if you have P and you have if P then Q, then I can't reject Q. I can't. It's the same with the cogito, right? It's like, if I am wondering who exists, then if I don't exist, who's wondering it? It's just like you can't reject that idea coherently. And I feel the same way about the laws of logic. They present themselves to me with force that is not merely like a habit, like that's something I've acquired over time. It feels different. It feels like a compulsion, like there's something important there. Now that could be an illusion. It sounds like what you're saying is basically an illusion. But if you think that there's a sense in which me understanding modus ponens is the reason why I make these inferences, me understanding what universal instantiation is, or what the axioms of identity are, is the reason why I feel compelled to go, aha, if it's true that all dogs are mammals and Fido's a dog, then God, I got to fucking accept that Fido's a mammal. I have to. It's like, so in that sense, the laws of logic are categorical imperatives. They don't just say, hey, if you want to be cool, do this. If you want to read, they say, fucking do it, bro. Like you don't have a choice. So why don't I have a choice? Oh, is it just like, it's evolution? There's nothing serious behind it. So all of it's an illusion. That just seems like a big price to pay. I guess you could say that, but then we could have evolved differently and had all kinds of wacky things that didn't work out very well. And, modus morons would be a fine thing, just as valid if we had evolved that way. And I can't accept that.
Right. I would agree completely. So I would say, like, to use Platonic objects as an example, I'd say there is a Platonic object of modus ponens that exists. And if your phrasing of modus ponens corresponds to that Platonic object, that's the right phrasing. And if you're using modus morons, then it doesn't correspond to that Platonic object. And so it's the wrong phrasing. So I'd say there is something in reality that is that thing, that system.
And that thing is normative.
I'm not sure I'm following the normative part. So again, I'd say that hypothetical imperative, if I want my ideas to correspond to reality, then I would need to do this. But I'm not following why there'd be some kind of categorical. To even accept
the hypothetical imperative, you already have to accept the things we're talking about. So I don't understand. It's you're like, you want to take for granted all the things we're saying and then help yourself to the dessert at the end without doing the work here. So
I'm not sure I'm following.
You don't even know how do you reason hypothetically at all? Why should you? So if P then Q, so why should I care about Q? Because if P then Q and also P, so therefore I should do Q. Like, you already have to accept modus ponens.
Right, I agree. I'm doing it.
Rationally compelling rule to even get to the point where you can do the hypothetical imperative that says, if you want to describe reality, then accept this logic.
Sure,
So
I
you have
agree
to
I'm doing
already
it.
have logic to do what you're saying.
Yes, I agree. So
So
I
you
agree I'm
can't do
doing
what
it.
you're saying. That's the point.
Well, I don't understand. So I agree I am currently doing it. I agree I'm doing logic, and I agree that you need logic to get to the hypothetical imperative, but I'm not seeing how I need the ought to do it in the first place. So it could just be random happenstance that my brain developed in such a way that it produced this correct way of logicking, and I'm using this logic. But there isn't an entailment that the way the universe is must have an ought in it to cause my brain to want to use this kind of logic. Or is that seems to be like the argument you're making, is that there must be
No,
this. Go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
Yeah. So the way I'm interpreting your argument is
By the
that.
way, we're assholes because we know what we're talking about. That's why, to answer the question in the chat. Go ahead.
So it seems to me that what you're arguing is that there must be some ought normativity somewhere in reality in order for me
Yeah.
to use logic.
I'm telling you that modus ponens is itself normative, so that there cannot be a non-normative modus ponens that just says out there somewhere platonically, if P then Q, P, Q. Modus ponens is a command. It says reason thusly, if P then Q, and P, then you had better motherfucking accept Q. That's what modus ponens says. It doesn't just describe something, it commands that you do something, reason in accordance with this rule. That's the thing that has to be out there. If modus ponens is out there, that's out there. So if that's out there, something normative is out there.
Okay, so could that just be a figment of the little L logic, that the normative part is just something we've added in because we want it this way, and is that required in the big L logic?
It depends, because that's the whole idea. That's what I've been trying to say this little bit before. I got distracted by all the chat stuff, which I'm fine to be distracted. I actually don't mind being called. I didn't know I was being an asshole, which I guess that was useful for someone to say so that I can, because I don't want to be an asshole, obviously. But if I am, it's nice to have someone point that out so I can go, oh yeah, did I want to come off that way? Anyway, so I thank you for that. But the idea is that when I engage in the rational process, like when I reason about things, there is a feeling of compulsion that I call making an inference. Like I feel like if I think these things are true, then I am obligated, or I feel like I have to accept these other things. So then I go back and go, okay, well, wait a minute. Do I really accept these other things? Are there reasons for questioning this? Like, for example, like a modus tollens type of argument that I take very seriously. If God exists, then there would be no suffering, but there is suffering. So then God doesn't exist. That's modus tollens. It's valid. It's if the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. The only question is, are the premises true? We have reasons to think yes. We have reasons to think no. I lean towards probably yes. Other people lean towards probably no, and whatever. So, but why should you? But therefore, if God exists, then there is no suffering. But there is suffering. Therefore, that's the part that's not merely descriptive. It says not just like this follows, but you should reason, you should infer that, you should accept this because these other things. So if you take that away, then what do you have left? I don't really see that you have modus ponens left anymore.
Just to explore that a bit, like, could you get rid of the therefore and just make it a descriptive statement and rephrase any descriptive statement as modus ponens, any formal argument? So just take, here are just a list of all facts about reality. And so forget the dogs. If Fido is a dog or whatever, and that's just a fact about reality, well, then you can reverse engineer modus, or an argument that represents that in the form of modus tollens.
How?
If Fido's a dog, all dogs are all mammals. All dogs are mammals. Fido is a dog. Fido is a mammal. So if we just look at all of the facts and we can just check each individual fact and say each individual dog is in fact a mammal. Yeah, we just literally just count them or whatever. And Fido is a dog. So Fido is also a mammal. You can just look at that as one of the facts about reality. And you can selectively isolate those facts as sets and just put those into a set thing and then describe those sets as premises and to put them into a conclusion that seems to make that connection just by describing facts about reality without the therefore at all. I mean,
Right.
would there be a problem with just taking each of the premises, describing them as facts in and of themselves and without the therefore? Do you need the therefore?
Do you think the laws of physics are rules?
No, I think they're just describing something that exists in reality.
Yeah, exactly. Laws of logic are rules. That's the difference. They're not just describing something that exists in reality. They're rules for doing something.
Well, could they be?
They tell you how to do something. They instruct you, or they describe how it is we do what we do when we engage in reasoning. So yeah, I could see why there's this little L logic descriptive part of it that I grant you. I've been saying all along, there is that aspect of it, that we are describing something that we do. But the question that I've been trying to ask, it goes beyond just describing it and asks for why we should accept it, why we should obey the rule once we understand. And the general answer that's been generally given is like, well, you understand the rule. The rule's a good rule. And you can see there's something, it's like the cogito stuff. There's something about it that you see that it's good. It's self, guaranteeing, intimating, or whatever word you want to use. It's like presents itself in a way that says, hey, I'm trustworthy. So what you're saying is, look, I want to take out that normative bit and say, not necessarily that you should reason in accordance with this, but just like universal instantiation, well, then it's not a rule anymore. Then what is it? It just is describing that every dog is a mammal. So it's just a list of every dog's and their name and a label with them being a mammal. But there's the question is what we do when we move from all dogs are mammals to Fido is a mammal, or that dog is a mammal over there. The question is, are we doing that merely out of habits, out of an innate disposition, or because we're using a rule, we understand the rule and applying it here? And that's the answer, which I think is the one that takes logic seriously. The other ones that don't, and maybe you shouldn't. So one response, and I've been trying to say along, one response just say, yeah, it's just like a habits, like Hume said, reason is not really all that great. But if you want to sort of take logic seriously, then I think that this is the rule part of it is a serious part of it. It's more than just the descriptive part. Yeah, that's part of it, but the rule part, that's important. Why should we follow what justifies the rule?
So why couldn't logic be like the laws of physics? Why couldn't we just rephrase the laws of physics and make them normative and say things ought to fall towards things with a greater mass?
The reason why they are supposedly not alike is because you can adopt any, like the new physics comes along and you can just adopt it and go along with it. But a new logic comes along, you can't, as we've already seen, because just to adopt a logic, you have to already have a logic. So
why is that a problem?
You can't just start. So I could start with no theory of physics and adopt a theory of physics easily. But for reasons we've discussed, it's not clear how you could start with no logic and adopt a logic.
Why is that a problem? Why is my ability to adopt it relevant to its ontological
because it shows it's not like physics.
I'm not following. So like, hypothetically, we could program a computer that logically just couldn't adopt a new physics. It won't accept any new physics. Or we could just mess with somebody's brain and this is the physics and they are incapable of changing their mind under any circumstances. Then what would the difference be then?
The difference is that the reason why you can't adopt the new thing, in the case you're describing, is just a physical block in the system, whereas here what we're describing is like a problem with thinking that logic is simply a system of formal rules, of formal. a formal system. Because what the view of logic that started all of this was that logic is a language, a formal language, which like gives you some symbols and some rules for how to manipulate them. And that way it makes it look just like a theory of physics, which is, you know, some mathematical symbols like some Hilbert space and some function on Hilbert space, or quantum mechanics, linear matrix, blah, blah, blah. And you're off on the races, and you're saying, okay, so I can do, you know, linear algebra over here, and it gives you some weird results, but you compute with it perfectly fine, blah, blah, blah. So logic doesn't seem like it can be like that is supposed to be the point of the discussion.
Yeah, I definitely have an intuitive difference there. As I see no problem with imagining a race of aliens that comes down and has a completely new logic that we just can't understand at all, and it seems completely incoherent and logically inconsistent to us. But them being able to describe it reality equal to or better than us seems perfectly reasonable for me to infer.
Right.
So I don't see why couldn't it be the case that I think that all of the paraconsistent and dialectistic logics fail, but that doesn't mean there isn't a logic like that could work that we just can't understand. So I don't see why our
right. But that's the whole point, though, is the paraconsistent logic is obviously fine. Like, I know Graham Priest; he's a great guy. Many valued logics are a wonderful thing. They're not ridiculous. They're, as formal systems, they're perfectly well understood, etc. But could we adopt a three-valued logic or a non-standard logic?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
It's supposed to be no, you cannot, because to adopt it, you already have to evaluate it using reasoning, a rationality. So logic is not, so logic with a capital L is not a matter of simply adopting a formal language. It's reasoning.
Well, that's the thing,
you have to be able to reason with the formal language. You have to be able to use it. The formal language is like a machine. It's a system that we set up, but you have to be able to turn the crank. And what turns the crank was there already and isn't the formal system and isn't captured by it.
Right, but that means that it could be purely just a physical thing in the brain, because if the aliens could do a different system, they could hypothetically just crank some things in our brain. Now, poof, you have a new logic, and like you obviously couldn't just logic your way into the new logic. That wouldn't be possible. But I don't see any logical inconsistency with a physical change in your brain being able to do this in some way. So what? Right. So our inability
that's why I said then you don't really. It's like you really don't take logic seriously. And that's fine. I said that you could go that route, but that seems like the route you're going. It's like you don't feel like that there is a compelling answer to the question, why should I follow this rule? And some people want to say the reason you should follow the rule is because you understand it. You grasp what's good about it. The truth of it is something that you got, that you can understand to grab. And what you're saying is, no, it's just some crank in the brain that turns and you do it, but you don't understand why you're doing it. And you're not really following the rule. There may be some system in you that like implements the rule, but you're not following the rule, like rationality, reason, all that other stuff logic talks about. You're not doing that. You're just kind of a physical system that happens to kind of chunk along in a way that goes along with these rules, but you're not really following them.
What's the difference?
Yeah, exactly. The difference is that so let's transcend from this discussion and go back to sort of common sense. For example, my dog and I, neither my dog nor I pee on the carpet inside the house. Why is that, one might wonder? Why don't I go and just piss on the carpet? Well, because I understand some stuff about that is bad and I ought not to do that and blah, blah, blah. What about the dog? Well, consequences. It'll be put outside, spanked, food withheld, possibly, etc. We don't spank the dog, but we would definitely say bad dog, and she doesn't like that. Okay, so the reason the dog does it is not because it doesn't understand the situation. It's not following it doesn't understand that it ought not to do it. It's simply has been conditioned to have behavior which is in accordance with a certain rule. Don't pee in the house. But the dog is not being guided by that rule. Its behavior is not prompted by an understanding of the rule. The rule doesn't figure in an explanation for why the dog does what it does. The dog does what it does because of these other circumstances, which I have cleverly set up to make it such that the behavior goes along with the rule, in accordance with the rule, but not because of the rule. Whereas me, one likes to think I'm not merely refraining from peeing on the carpet for those kinds of reasons. You know, some of it is probably, yeah, I don't want to be beat up by my wife and the kids. It's whatever. But a large part of it is simply because I understand that it wouldn't be good to do that, not healthy, not sanitary. It'd be a mess. I ought not to do it. So I understand the rule. I'm sort of, you know, give me the benefit of the doubt that there could be a rule here. Maybe you don't agree, but I think a rule of hygiene or something, let's say, whatever. So I follow the rule, the dog does not. And so if with respect to logic, I'm like the dog, then youch, bummer, dude. It could be true, but if it were, then I would be really bummed. And then the other guys would have scored a point on us because they have a way to make these rules objective and such that we have to follow them for real, not because we're being dog-like. And I would prefer to have something like that doesn't have to invoke some spooky supernatural boss dude making the rules. But you still need to have an answer to where did the rules come from? Why are they there? And why are they serious as opposed to more like the dog situation? So if you're okay with logic being like, you know, then I said that you could go that way. But I feel the force that these guys are trying to press you on is, and that I haven't really thought that you have answered them, is that, yeah, what they want is a kind of answer that I want, but they want the answer to be, it has to be God, and I don't see why it has to. So there, I'd argue with them about that. I don't think it has to be God. Certainly, if there were a God, then there would be maybe a solution to this problem. But simply saying there is reality doesn't seem like it's a solution to this problem.
Well, so I see it as both. I think that both the logic, we're like the dog and we're just following the system that's been programmed into our brain and we have no choice in it, whether we realize it or not. But also there are these objective capital L logic that exists as a part of fundamental reality. It's there, just like the theists think it's a part of God. They don't think it's God's consciousness. It's a part of his nature. I think logic is essentially a part of nature's nature. And is correct.
But nature doesn't reason.
Why would it need to?
Because that's what logic is. Logic is rules for reasoning. That's what it is. The capital L logic is reasoning. It's the rules that govern reasoning.
Why couldn't that be like
should reason?
A law of physics? So like E equals MC squared doesn't exist in the universe. It just describes something in the universe. So why can't the oughtness or normativity also just be describing something in the universe?
Yeah, but where are the things in the universe which accidentally don't follow the law of gravity? Where are the things in the universe that try to follow the law of gravity but don't?
I don't think there are any.
Exactly. But there are plenty of things that try to be rational and fail.
Sure.
So they're not the same. Their laws don't govern the same sorts of things, since the physical objects cannot fail but obey the physical laws. But whatever the laws of logic are, we certainly can and do often fail to obey them. And the question is, why should we obey them? What force, where do they get their authority from? By what right does modus ponens command me? Why is it good? Why should I follow that rule as opposed to a different rule? The things you're saying don't really answer that question. You're saying there's reality and it is a certain way, but that doesn't have anything to do with how I reason about reality.
I still don't, I'm not sure.
As I'm a part of reality.
I'm still not sure I'm understanding the question here. I still don't quite get it. So like, if we imagine there is a specific law of nature that has a orders of magnitude weaker than gravity, and it only affects things in certain conditions, then we can try to be affected by that law, but not be affected by that law. We can fail to be affected by the law, just like certain particles can fail to be affected by gravity.
How are we trying to, whatever the law applies to, it is affected by it. There's no trying. So I mean, so certainly there are, like, the law of gravity is negligible at the subatomic scale. So that if you think about nuclear physics, you don't have to worry about gravity. The strong nuclear force is just like dominates the discussion. So you just rule gravity as effectively zero. That doesn't mean that those objects don't obey the law of gravity. It just means that the thing that gravity governs, mass, and then the interactions, are at a point negligible there. But if there were mass, it would govern it. So the idea is that what logic governs is reason, rationality, and if there's reason, then it governs it. But it doesn't govern it in the way that gravity governs mass, because there are creatures that could be rational that fail to be so. But there are no masses which could be attracted by gravitation which fail to do so. It's different. That one is one's normative.
To me, I don't see the difference there. So like gravity, for example, if you can be small enough to be not affected by gravity, essentially, then it could be the same case with logic, where you're affected by some other force that is a competing force with gravity, and like size is or whatever, and that other force takes over, and so it overrules the logical force on your brain.
Right. But what does that have to do with anything? So
because you said the difference between logic and physics is that there's no one who can try to obey the laws of physics and fail. So here's an example where they can try to obey the laws of physics and fail because they're affected by some other force more so, or it overrides.
How are they trying? So no physical object tries to obey the physical laws. They simply do.
I
don't try to fall down when I trip.
Sure, but I can be like, so if there's two forces and I want to be affected by one force more than the other, I can like try to grab things with more mass or something to build up my own mass because I want to be affected by the one force rather than the other one. So I can deliberately try to be affected by gravity and fail because the other force is greater or whatever. Or I grabbed the anti-gravity particles instead and I'm being pulled to the other force more or whatever. I don't see how this is different from.
But that's not. So okay, let me back up for a second. It's not about trying. The point is not about trying. Is that there's stuff that happens.
Sure.
Okay. Some of that stuff is called reasoning, and some of that stuff is called falling. And things which reason often, very often, deviate from the laws which allegedly govern reasoning, whereas things which fall never deviate from the laws which govern falling. So there clearly is a difference between what the laws are governing, what kind of thing they are. Since in one case you have the thing which fails to conform to the law all the time, left and right, over there, here, happening now. Over there, never does that ever happen where the thing fails to be governed by the alleged law, the law of gravity in this case. That's the difference. We reason badly all the time. Things don't fall badly. They just fall. The laws of physics affect them. And then various things get in the way, other forces affect them. Sure, that's more laws of physics. That's not really the point. The point is the object doesn't ever deviate from what the ever laws are that govern it. Whereas we reason all the time in ways that vary from what the laws say. Modus ponens is not always respected. Universal instantiation, neither. I mean, the law of distribution, forget about it. It's like every one of these logical laws. Modus tollens, I've had so many arguments with students in my class tell me modus tollens is not a valid argument. That's just not valid. So who's right? I don't know. Anyway, the point is one of us is making a mistake there about modus tollens. But no physical object that moves in a slightly different way than some other physical object is making a mistake with respect to the laws of physics. It's just the way the physics are affecting them is different. But what is affecting us differently when we reason badly as opposed to poorly? Well, in the good case, it's we follow the rule, and the rule is guiding our behavior. In the bad case, it isn't. It's not like that in physics.
So I'm still
Reasoning
struggling.
incorrectly is reasoning. It's like saying that is like saying a broken toaster isn't a toaster. Broken toasters are toasters. They're just ones that don't do toasting very well. And reasoning incorrectly is reasoning. It's just bad reasoning.
Wouldn't that be the same like if I said...
Yeah, I'm reading the chat. Exactly. I've been reading the whole time.
I am not reading the chat. I don't usually read the chat.
I like to know when people are talking shit.
So suppose when people did fall, they suddenly magically started to fall up, and you said, well, that's still gravity. You could do that, but it may not be. Maybe it's just a different force that's affecting you and it's just stopped all gravity affecting you or whatever. Why can't logic be the same thing? So we're trying to reason logically, but the law of emotion takes over, and now we failed at reasoning. We're not doing reasoning anymore. Now we're doing emotion. We didn't do it right.
Where's the emotion in the... Which card should I turn over if I want to know if there's a vowel on the other side of this square or whatever the example was from the Watson selection test? No emotion. Just for bad at abstract reasoning.
I'd say that's just mostly emotion, actually. We're just using patterns that we've...
What emotion?
Patterns that we've seen before that we like, and we try to use those same patterns because they've had success in the past to do whatever we're trying to do, and it's just a bad pattern.
Oh, so you're saying that they're not reasoning in that case. Then if they were reasoning, they would... you want to hug me.
They're not... You guys
are funny.
They're not
Who's
capital...
the guy that's confusing the map for the place? That's what I want to know.
They're not doing the capital L reasoning. So if you say reasoning is the capital L logic, they're not doing that. They're doing the little L logic where they've done it silly and they just don't realize it. They're trying to do the capital L reasoning. They're just failing at it.
Right. Okay. So if you agree that there's the capital L logic, then the question is what justifies it?
What do you mean?
You haven't answered that. That's the question we've been asking this whole time. So the capital L logic is what you ought to infer from this case. It's a claim. Capital L logic is a theory or a claim about what you should do, how you ought to reason. That's the normative stuff that I've been trying to go on and on about this whole time. So if you want to say you should reason in that way, then why should you reason in that way as opposed to the other way is the question that needs to be answered. And of course, they want to say because God sets the rules, and I want to reject that answer, but I still think you need to say something about why the rules are good and where the normativity comes from.
And you're saying we can't say that just because reality makes it that way. Reality set this as a law, just like it set gravity as a law, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that's an insufficient answer for some reason.
No, that's not what I said. What I said is if you say that, then you have to say that there are normative laws in reality, which just seems very strange. And some people would say that sounds very strange. And I would say that sounds very strange.
I think that's where
Thomas Nagel has argued that we should go back to this older Aristotelian idea that there are normative laws in nature, and that he thinks that consciousness is an example. I disagree with him about this, but he thinks consciousness is an example where you need some kind of directed evolution, some kind of normativity of working towards something, right? Something goal guidedness that the universe has to be built so as to produce consciousness, not in a way that involves God. That's the part where he's not a religious person. But anyway, if you think reality is normative, then that's an answer to the question. You could just say there's normativity built into reality. That's just the way it is. It's just like what you precepts say about God, except it's not God. It's just fundamental normativity. Like reality is just motherfucker modus ponens, dude. Like just do it. That's it. But that's very strange. And a lot of people would be like, well, how could something normative be fundamentally physical? I mean, that's where, all this stuff about it's not natural, it's not physical comes from, because the normative just seems very different than the stuff that's out there. But you could go that way, and you could, if they want to dig their foot in and say, just God and he is normative, or his essence or being is normative or something, you could say there's just something physical which is normative. It's just, I think that's a weaker position because most people don't think of a physical in that way.
Sure. So normally I make the argument that whatever grounds logic or morality or whatever can't be God's consciousness. It can't be his intentionality. It can't be like telling you to do stuff, because then it's just go with the Euthyphro dilemma. Is it because God said so, or did God say so because it's for some other reason? And pretty much every theist just grants, oh, it's his nature. It's not his consciousness. You just get rid of the consciousness part. It's his nature. And at that point, you get rid of the normativity, unless because his consciousness is where the normativity stuff is, right? It's got to be some kind of like intentionality, rationality stuff. And so
why? I mean, so if what I was just saying was right, then you could say, no, it's the normativity is just some physical thing.
Well, right. So this is the part where because the theist will usually grant you don't need consciousness to grant whatever property they want, then I can just say, okay, we can do that without consciousness in my worldview too. So I don't know how they make that work, or how they claim.
Because they're going to say something like that logic is grounded in God's nature.
Yeah.
That there's something rational about his nature. Like, I mean, you can say that about anything. It's like there's something loving about his nature. That's how they get out of the Euthyphro dilemma, by the way, in case you haven't followed the history of that discussion. You say Euthyphro dilemma, does he command it because it's good, or is it good because he commanded it? And then they say, oh, he commands it because it's good, but the goodness is his nature. So that it's not the command that makes it good, it's his nature that makes it good. That's the movie you were just saying. But the part of his nature that makes it good is the loving bit, or the reason why the commands are good is because they come from the loving.
Right. So I modify the Euthyphro dilemma a bit. I just make it God's consciousness or not God's consciousness. So is something good because of a God conscious decision or conscious desires of any kind, or is it some other thing that's not his consciousness? And they'll usually grant it's not his consciousness, it's his nature. In which case, you don't need the consciousness. You don't need the intentionality, the normativity, the oughts, the reasoning. All the consciousness is gone. It's now some non-conscious part of his nature that grounds everything, essentially. Because if his consciousness could choose to change any part of his nature, well, then it's arbitrary. And so his conscious desires must be determined by his nature, or otherwise he could lie or whatever. So at that point, they've granted you can now have all of this stuff with no mind, because it's a part of his non-conscious nature. And I just copy that. I don't obviously don't think it works, but
you shouldn't copy their confusion. And the fact that they're confused is not a reason for you to be confused.
well, my argument is just to show that you can take their own arguments and apply it to anything you want and make it work equally. So it's a mirroring kind of a thing. So but
the question, but the Euthyphro dilemma, because the ethics is a whole different. I mean, there is an interesting symmetry here.
Right.
Because you want to reject normativity in ethics.
Right. That's the normativity part.
Reject it in logic, and you can't.
Well, so the normativity part is where it comes in. So they say they can answer the normativity thing just like they can the moral thing, and say it's a part of his nature, not his consciousness. So you don't need a mind anymore. So if they grant that, well, then I can just do the same thing in my worldview. So, but you're making another claim. You're saying that no non-conscious thing can have this normativity stuff. I don't.
No, I said that. I didn't say that. What I said was that lots of people would find it very strange if the fundamental laws of nature or physics included normative claims. That's right. What I said.
Yeah. So what I'm trying
to... notice this is this is the argument that goes all the way back to Plato. So Plato says there's this thing called the good. The good is a non-physical, eternal, non-changing source of all the things which are moral, blah, 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 but also the thing that motivates me to want to do the good stuff. And that's a very strange kind of object. What kind of object could there, and it's not even a physical object. So it's not even that it's a physical thing. It's just that there's something out there that's intrinsically motivating or normative or telling me that I should do something. That it's out there is the weird part. That it's, so whether it's a Platonic object, I mean, this is a common objection from J.L. Mackie. He called it the argument from queerness. That's a weird dated term that we wouldn't use nowadays. But it means a strangeness. The old, the old days were like, gee, that's queer. Gee, I feel gay today. It's like just a different way of talking. So the argument from the strangeness of it is the idea that the kind of object that we're talking about is intrinsically in its nature motivational. It compels you to do something. And Plato thought that the good was like that, that if you knew what the good was, you had to do what was good. You had to. Because the good itself was the kind of thing that made you fucking do it, dude. And so Plato denied that there could be a true psychopath or anyone who didn't care about the good or doing the right thing. People were just confused about what the right thing was. And if they knew, they would do it, etc. And many people have said, gee, that's just bizarre. How could there be something? It's not even a physical thing. Plato said these are non-physical. It's not the physical part. It's just that it's a thing out there that's intrinsically motivating or normative. And then so people said, well, that can't be what the good is, whatever it is, got to be something else. But so unless you want to say something like that would you revive that old kind of view but have it be a logic thing or something? Unless you want to say something like that, saying that it's doing that move isn't really going to answer this question that they really want answered, which is what justifies the command, the why should I follow this rule, modus ponens or whatever.
Right, I'm just exploring ideas here to try and get a better understanding of your argument, because I still don't think I fully understand it. So why can't all motivation just be psychological evolution, nothing more? There is no motivation thing in the universe. It's all psychological. But there could still be a logic that describes how reality works or maps onto reality just fine. Why would there be a contradiction in those two claims, both being true?
There wouldn't. So like I said before, you could have a view like that, and then what you would end up denying is that we reason in accordance or because of the rules. We don't follow the rules.
Right. Yeah, I would say that if there are rules of logic, the rules of logic themselves don't make our brains work this way. I definitely wouldn't claim that to be the case.
Yeah, see, I would. See, I want to say that the reason why I follow modus ponens is because I understand it. And in fact, I try to make sure that the inferences that I make follow patterns like modus ponens or disjunctive syllogism or hypothetical syllogism, categorical syllogisms, not every, or more complicated, constructive dilemmas. So there's all sorts of patterns, but it's just like if you go, if you go to martial arts and you study various physical forms that you have, okay, so this is a block, this kind of block, the same modus ponens, disjunctive syllogism are the same. They're patterns of reasoning which you should follow, that you ought to perform, that are good, that lead you from two things to two things. So I try, and I fail all the time and make bad inferences and make mistakes. We all do, but then we go, okay, we want to be more careful. So why should we follow that rule though? If it's just a blind instinct, okay, that's not satisfying. If we're just built that way, that would suck. I mean, it could be true, but I'd be depressed because I feel like I'm doing it because I see what's good about it. I understand what's good about it. I feel the force of the rule. It compels me.
Yeah, I think I understand your argument.
And if it was what you just said, then I'd be depressed.
Yeah, so I think I understand your argument now that the laws of logic themselves are what make our brains work the way they do. And that I would definitely disagree with. I don't see any contradiction with the...
No, they don't make our brains. It's that we want our brains to work in accordance with them. And when we don't, we're doing something wrong. So it's like with your morality stuff. So it's like, I heard you say, you're not a vegan. I am a vegan, by the way, for moral reasons, because I think normativity is important in these areas as well. So, okay, great. So you say, look, I recognize that eating meat is immoral, but I don't care about being moral. So I'm just going to continue to eat meat. And so imagine someone who said that about modus ponens. Look, I recognize that modus ponens is a valid argument for him, but I don't care about being rational, and I'm not going to follow that rule. So according to you, they should be on equal footing, right? But according to me, like one is like makes you kind of like a bad person. Maybe the other one is like you're irrational. That's just completely,
Yeah, I don't fundamentally see a difference between those two. But yeah, so
because well, all right. So you don't care about reasoning well.
Yeah, I would say prioritize happiness over everything. So even if you're completely illogical, if it makes you happy, go for it. I don't.
Yeah, I mean, Sartre said the same thing. He said even being rational is a choice. I just disagree with that. I feel like we're compelled to be rational.
Yeah, I still don't think I fully grasp what that means. I don't think I've ever felt something like that to be able.
Well, it's the same with like the categorical imperative. It's like there's a sense of. I mean, I don't know, 2 + 2 = 4. Okay, so how do you feel about that?
And you're saying that feeling comes from the law itself?
Yes.
Whereas I think that...
what I'm saying is that is the law.
That is the law.
And what I want to know is what justifies it.
What justifies...
So modus ponens is the... So that's the whole, I mean, that maybe is a good way of making this point that I've been fumbling this whole time to make. And by the way, I can't be here forever, unfortunately, although I'm having fun, obviously, in my lunch break, basically. Having this but there's a lot more that could be said about this, and it could be said better. But So we have something that you could write down schematically, like phi, horseshoe, psi, line 1, line 2, phi, line, psi, right? So there's modus ponens written down as an abstract formal thing. That's not modus ponens. And you agree, that's a description of something we do, right?
Yeah.
That's a description of something that we do. So whatever modus ponens is, it's what we do. So what is it that we do? Well, I would argue what we do is we have these feelings of compulsion, that we feel forced to accept certain things. And if you met somebody and said, you know, I agree that if it's raining, you should bring an umbrella. And of course, I agree that you should bring an umbrella. I agree with you that if it's raining, you should bring an umbrella. And of course, I know that it's raining, but I don't see any reason why I should bring an umbrella. Right? If somebody said those sorts of things to you and just said, I don't, you know, this is like the tortoise and what the hare said to Achilles or whatever, that Lewis Carroll thing where the tortoise is asking why he should accept modus ponens. And basically says, why should I accept Q if you say if P then Q and P? And he says, well, if you have if P then Q, and if you have P, then you should accept Q. Why should I accept that? Well, if you have if P then Q, then you should accept Q, then you should accept if you have, blah, blah, and you just start iterating it all the way out. You never get to a point where you can say why you should follow the rule. And of course, the lesson from there has often been thought to be, you shouldn't think of the rules as part of the logical system. They're somehow set outside of the logical system. But that's, of course, the whole problem that we've been discussing, is that if the rules are not part of the logical system, but outside of it, then what justifies our following them? Why am I right that I should follow modus ponens and that you shouldn't follow modus morons or whatever? What justifies that? Is it just a habit? Is it just like, you know, this is what's successful? Or is it something about the rule itself that I recognize that's guiding my behavior? That's the question.
Yeah, I would definitely lean more towards the socially constructed, just successful kind of a thing. I think that what we're doing when reasoning is just our brain is making models to describe reality. And that's what reasoning is ultimately. It's just our brain making models to try to describe reality. And so the rules
But that
themselves.
can't be what it is. That's the whole point of everything we've just been saying, is that cannot be what reason is. It cannot simply be making models.
Why not? Why can't
because
it be?
What do you do with the model? A model, like, what is a model? What is it? It's a set of sentences maybe, or like in logic, it would be at the very basic level, a truth table, an interpretation of the symbols or whatever you have. It's like, you know, something that, so, but what do you do with it? How does it work? What rules govern it? And why should you follow those rules? And any given model can have all kinds of rules which govern the way that it runs. So why should you pick any one of those versus the other? And what justifies selecting one versus the other?
Or I say that's just evolution. Evolution picked this is the one you're doing, and you don't have a choice in it. But I'd say that the reason it picked that one is because it's trying to make.
So yeah, so that's but I've been saying this the whole time. That's the view you have, which is not a weird or strange view. But it doesn't respect the question. It doesn't take seriously the question we're asking, and it sort of just says there's no good answer to it. There's no real reason you should follow these rules as opposed to a different set of rules. Because if we had evolved to follow a different set of rules, those would be the rules you should follow. And if we had evolved to follow a third set of rules, those would be the rules that you should follow. So there is no real good there. It's not that the rule is right or correct or captures something about reality, that you should reason this way, that's what it would capture. It's not that. It's just accidentally the system set up this way. And we can't question it or reason outside of it because of the way it's set up, but there's no good reason for the way it's set up. That seems bad. I mean, I would be very sad if that were.
So you couldn't say that some reasoning accurately captures reality while some reasoning doesn't actually accurately capture reality? Would that be a logical contradiction in that statement somewhere?
Yeah, because you keep thinking that logic tries to describe tables, chairs, etc. Whereas I keep trying to convince you that what logic really describes is reason. It describes how you should reason, what you should accept is true on the basis of which other things you accept is true, which is not about what's out there and what tables and chairs, etc., but about what you should move from the truth of one thing to the truth of the next thing, what it implies, etc. So there are seemingly facts of the matter about what you should do here, that logic tries to capture and codify in these formal systems.
Facts of the
And
matter.
so by capturing reality, I take it that that's what we're trying to capture, what we should do. But you keep trying to think that what we're trying to capture is some external thing out there. But that's not, so it's like the debate in morality, right? So the question for me here is not what's good out there, what's the nature of goodness? It's what should we do? That's the question. And so a theory of logic in this sense that I'm talking about is a theory of how we should reason, not how we do reason, but how we should reason. And it's not a theory of what's out there. You can't get from Ayn Rand, A equals A, to anything that I'm talking about, because you need to know what to do with A equals A. That was the point of the axioms of identity. You have to postulate some axioms, you have to postulate a formal system, but then you have to use it. And in order to be able to use it, there has to be something prior to that called reasoning. And then the question is, well, is that good or bad? And what we're trying to capture there is how it should be, not the way it is. That's the reality that we're trying to capture. So you have to deny that there is any such normative reality. You have to say that all there is non-normative reality. But that doesn't seem to be enough to capture what we are talking about, because we're talking about what you should do.
Yeah, yet if your question is why should we use this logic over this logic? Yeah, I think that's just an incoherent question. Like, I don't think it would be an important question to be able to answer. And I don't know why in your argument that is why it is an important question to answer. Like, for me,
because there's a right answer.
What do you mean?
There is a correct answer to the question, which logic should we use?
Sure. I mean, I would agree with that. I think that's true.
So that's why it's an important question.
But why can't that be true and not be normative? Like, or just
because
say
if we should use it, if there's a fact of the matter about what we should do, then there's a normative fact, because it's a fact about what we should do.
So, like,
if it's a normative fact, then it's hard to see how it fits into all the descriptive stuff that's already out here, which doesn't mean it's not physical or whatever. Who knows, as I've already said, but at least you should recognize that these are normative facts that we're trying to explain here. And you either have to deny that they exist or give an account of them.
Yeah, I'm still trying to understand it, because I don't see normative just means nothing to me. I think it's completely irrelevant to reality. I think that all we're doing when reasoning is just categorizing stuff we see and labeling it, and that's it. I don't think there's any normative stuff in our brain going on. I think reasoning is just a process of the brain. The brain doesn't have any normativity to it, doesn't need any normativity to it.
Sure it does. What are you talking about?
I mean,
how? So why would you think that you don't need any normativity? The brain doesn't need normativity.
Like, I don't think
I'm not sure what the force of that claim is, or what evidence there is to think it's true.
I don't think there is any normativity in any neurons or neurological process.
Why not?
Other than just emotional, like, I don't think it's like an actual thing that exists in the neurons anywhere. I think there's artificial constructions like unicorns, and normativity is like a unicorn that we've made up and applied stuff.
Yeah. So you don't really believe in logic. So you don't really take logic. I mean, that's fine. And you can say that, because if that's how you feel about logic, then you don't really think that there is a fact of the matter about what you should do.
Yeah, I probably would agree with that.
That there's no right or wrong when it comes to how you ought to reason.
Yeah, I don't.
But of course, I think there are facts of the matter. Modus ponens is one of them, for example. Universal instantiation is probably another. Law of non-contradiction, I don't know. Now, so that's why I think the paraconsistent dialethism stuff is a red herring, because when you evaluate the case for a paraconsistent logic, you're still reasoning about the formal system. And are you employing the law of non-contradiction at the meta level? Gee, I would say so. So you could certainly accept the law of non-contradiction failing at the object level language, the A logic level language, the lowercase L logic language. It doesn't imply that it fails at the uppercase L logic, the rational the reasoning level. So the fact, this is a kind of, in a more elaborate way, this is I don't agree with everything that he says, but now I'm blanking on his name. Who's that philosopher at Oxford, the logic guy? Timothy Williamson. This is an argument that Timothy Williamson has made in a certain context that is more technical, that he says that the object level language, the language of the logic itself, the law of non-contradiction would fail. But the meta language, the language that you use to describe the object language, the way you talk about it, the law of non-contradiction holds up there. And so if that's sort of what I've been saying, if the law of non-contradiction holds at a level of rationality, then why does it? Why should I accept it? Why should I obey that rule? And what you're saying is that there are no rules to obey here. There's just like physical systems in motion, which just denies what I think of as the data, the thing we're trying to explain.
Yeah, I think that would be the fundamental disagreement. Is I don't think logic is a rule. I think logic is a law like physics and literally nothing more. I think there's literally no difference between a law of logic and a law of physics. It's just a thing that literally exists in nature and nothing more. And there's no normativity to logic any more so than physics, in my view. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't think there's normativity in physics, but I think morality involves normativity. But I agree. I understand your position about morality, and by the way, traditionally utilitarians have made that distinction actually, and said that because people used to say in the old days, it's too hard to calculate all the utility, so utilitarianism is stupid. Fuck it, and then the utilitarians said no. The fact that we suck doesn't mean that it's not a correct account of what objectively is moral.
Yep.
It's just we can't always, know or follow the rule or whatever. So I understand the kind of position you're making about denying the normativity of ethics while still trying to maintain that there's something that's objectively right or good or out there. But I don't really see how that applies to the logic case because of the stuff that we've been talking about. And maybe you just don't agree that there are these, that you should think of logic as the laws of logic as laws of what you should do, how you ought to reason, normative laws, in other words, of how things should be. But that was what I was trying to get you to see is different in the physics case, because whereas there's lots of reasoning that fails to be rational, there aren't any objects that fail to be falling when dropped, etc. And I understand your point about maybe there's the emotions are, I'm hungry, so that's there. There could be other reasons, and maybe the wind blows, that's why the feather doesn't fall. So there are those analogies. I understand that analogy, but there are pure cases, I think, that we can say where reasoning fails. Like, I don't know, take the case of someone who thought they proved the parallel postulate. We now know you can't do that, but people thought they did, and for 20 years or so, people thought maybe it had been done. Lots of smart people didn't see the mistake in this reasoning. There was a step that they shouldn't have made that they did make. So that's where the normativity comes in. And if you don't have the normativity stuff, you won't ever do reasoning. What are you going to do?
Yeah, I think that's the fundamental part that I think would need clarifying, is like, why can't we form logic without normativity? Why is normativity so ingrained in logic? Because I don't see it as necessary. I don't understand why it would be a problem to just form modus ponens as descriptive and get rid of all the normativity altogether. And so that's
because almost nobody conforms to modus ponens. That's why. So if you just did that, you would reject modus ponens. And you would say, well, there's this group of really strange people hanging out in Oxford and Yale and these other areas that seem to be this other species that accept modus ponens. And then there's everybody else who watches Kim Kardashian and rejects it. And, well, there's no fact of the matter about who's getting it right or wrong. And you say usefulness, blah, blah, blah. I say, yeah, right. They're still alive. People who are not great reasoners don't die instantly. They go to school, they get jobs, they carry on with their life. So you cannot tell me that the reason why logic blah blah is useful. Come on, that's not what logic is good for. It's good for something else if it's good for something. But emotions are good for, jumping to conclusions. Affirming the consequent fallacy. Those are the useful things. All the fallacies in the intro textbook, those are the useful things because they protect me and they get my genes in the gene pool before I have to worry about being a bad person. Those are the things we're trying to weed out because the other things are better. But if you just want to go purely descriptive, then holy moly, take the average fallacy textbook. There's your theory of rationality. Count me out.
For sure. So like if we just were created 5 minutes ago and we're subject to all human emotions and things, and we were writing a model of logic just based off of those, it would include all those fallacies. Like that would be fundamental to our theory of reasoning. But then
it never was.
It never was.
No, even when Aristotle first started doing this, he talked about informal fallacies, formal fallacies, mistakes of reasoning. People generally agreed, etc.
Imagine those were discovered at some point. Like imagine humans did think they were perfectly rational at some point, and then someone pointed out, actually, that doesn't work for here's the reason. We can demonstrate that doesn't work. So now we found a contradiction between one system of reasoning, which has fallacies in it, and one system that doesn't, and we can apply both of those systems.
You both avoid the bear.
Avoid the bear. Oh yeah, both avoid the
have kids and so modus. So let's call it, you have an offspring and you teach them modus ponens, call him George. And then I have an offspring and I teach them modus morons, call them Georgina or I don't know, whatever. So we got George and Georgina. All right, they both survive. They both have kids. They both have jobs. This guy reasons according to modus morons. This guy reasons according to modus ponens. So I say, even though they both live, one's doing it wrong.
Yeah,
incorrect, like objectively.
I would compare the systems and we would try to find a case where one system does one thing and another system does another thing. And we compare that to reality in some sense and say the one that more accurately represents reality is the one that's right.
I mean, that move is just so problematic for me. I mean, I understand that you're going to say it until you die, apparently, but what is the reality we're trying to describe is the question. So let me switch to math real fast. So do you take the same view about math? Like 2 + 2 = 4, arithmetic?
Pretty much.
Okay. So we could find out that 2 + 2 is 5, and you would be okay with that.
It wouldn't make sense to me, but I would accept it if it worked in reality.
So you could wake up tomorrow and there would be a headline in the newspaper and it says, scientists discover 3 is even. And you might be like, wow, shit, I didn't know that. Cool.
If it made novel predictions, I'd be like, you win. I don't care. I'm stupid. Yes.
Okay. See, I think that's impossible. And I don't think that there ever even possibly could be a case where scientists discover that 3 is even. Now you can define weird mathematical systems and use weird words weirdly. I know that there are ways of defining plus in such a way that 2 + 2 = 5. That's not the point. Formalisms are under our control. We make them. They are ours to control. But the question is, what's true? What's real? So if 2 + 2, so I, for example, I mean, so it sounds like you already disagree. So maybe this argument will work on you. But many people are going to think, agree with me, that 3 can't be even. It just has to be odd.
Yeah, I would agree.
People are going to think 2 + 2 = 4. It just has to be that way.
Well, I would agree, and I would say that would be the little m math, the language thing, not the big M math. To go back to our big little L's analogy.
Right. So the big M math, like reality, has to be that 2 + 2 = 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, but why?
Why is it a problem to say that's just the way reality is?
Because when you add 2 and 2 together and get 4, and somebody says, I don't understand, why is it 4 as opposed to 5? If your only answer to them is, it's just that way, accept it, then you don't understand math. And that's fine. Maybe none of us understand math, but some of us feel like we do. And some of us feel like we know the reason why 2 + 2 is 4 and why it has to be that way. And it has to do with these kind of facts about what plus means, what the function it denotes is.
Well, that would again be the little m math. What plus means is about the little m math, not the big M math.
No, it's about how we reason arithmetically. So that's again the exact same distinction between little math and big logic or whatever. One is something we do already. We want a theory of it. then we write down some formal systems.
I'm stuck on that part. So the plus is a part of the big M math, you're saying?
Yes. It's the same problem because Kripke gives the same kind of argument in with the quus and plus. You know that argument? I mean, it's sort of similar to this one. It's related in a way.
Yep.
But the idea is,
two indistinguishable minds, one's doing math, one's doing Q math or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So that, I mean, you have to set it up in a certain way, but so, you've been adding these numbers. You've never added any number over 57 together. So you're perfectly good at adding numbers under 57, but you've never added any numbers that are higher than 57, but you can answer any question about numbers below that. So then someone comes and asks you what 300 plus 500 is. You say 800. They say, no, the answer is 3. You say, no, it's not, it's 800. They say, no, it's not, it's 3. And then furthermore, they say, well, why do you think it's 800? And they say, well, because I'm doing addition, I'm doing plus. And they go, yeah, but you've never done any big numbers like this before. So how do you know you haven't been doing this other thing called quus? Namely, it says numbers up to 57 work like you've always done. Anything over that, sum is 3. So there's nothing that you can point to in your history which would answer the question, were you doing quus or pluser? There's just nothing you can say. Because, I mean, just what would you say? You've only added numbers below 57. So there's nothing. So people say disposition, this or that, the other thing. So there's a whole literature on this. It turns out it's very difficult to say what it is that would, I mean, Kripke actually thinks there's no fact of the matter, or that it's a primitive fact, or that, who knows? It's actually very difficult. But you've said, well, there's just some physical fact that accounts for the difference, but that's inconsistent. You can't say that, because the way this story's set up is that your behavior, your physical, everything is compatible with it being either. There's nothing physically that distinguishes between plus and quus at that point, physically.
Right. I think my answer is that we just look back at your history and identify what the process was when it was formed in your brain. And if we can identify the process of how it was formed in your brain, we can tell that it was, or whatever people were trying to teach you, one or the other.
But you can't look at that process because of that's the whole point of the very scenario, is that here's a way to put it. The part of the process which you can examine is the same as between those two different processes. So they overlap only in the part that you get to look at. So no matter how carefully you look at that part, how it was formed or anything about it, it won't answer the question we're asking, because the pattern that it produces, that the two things produce in the segment that you get to analyze, is identical. Therefore, there's nothing that can differentiate them up until you get to the point where someone says 200 plus 300 or whatever.
Well, couldn't you look
because of the reason that the definition is the same. Any number below 57, you do it this way, successor function, blah, blah, blah. You define math all the normal way. Any number above that equals 3.
Well, isn't that process going to be somewhere in the brain, that they've learned that law somewhere?
Which law?
Any number below 57 works this way, any number above 57 works this way. Isn't that entailed in the math they've learned somewhere?
Well, so if what you're saying is, did they officially, I mean, I don't know. Did you learn math? Have you been to school?
Occasionally.
So, did they tell you this works for numbers above a certain range? In grade school, did they tell you that?
No.
I don't believe they did. They just give you a bunch of examples. They say, this is plus, here's how you do it. And they show you an algorithm. And maybe if you're advanced enough, they might even explain the algorithm, but usually they don't. They just show it to you and say, do this. And then you do. And then you acquire some ability and you go around adding. You should have been here before, and then you would know. So the tuning in people.
I just want to check in. When do you need to go? Because I want to respect your time when you need to.
Yeah, I know. It's later than I thought, actually. The guidance counselor said not to smoke now. So yeah, I do have to leave pretty soon actually, because it's been going longer than I thought. So maybe by a little after 2.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yeah, it's fine. No, you must stay on here for the next 4 hours until we're done discussing
trapped.
it.
Prisoner in TJump's chair. But so what you're saying is that somebody would have told you at some point that you're doing quaddition or addition, or quaddition or addition. They would have said, here's the system, but no one learns math that way. I mean, you're showing a few examples and you pick it up and then you understand it. And they don't formally define it in second grade. My son can already add, he's in kindergarten. They didn't say successor function equals successor of n equals n plus 1. Ha, now, okay, so 2 plus 2 equals successor of 1 equals successor of n plus 1. They don't do that. They give you some examples and then the kids pick it up. And then not only that, but they carry on and all of that stuff. So that's the point, is that no, the thing that you're saying is explicitly not the way that it works. That's just not how we learn math.
Well, suppose there are 2 different maths. One is addition, one is quaddition, and they operate in different ways at some point. Do they operate in different ways by definition? If so, then you should be able to look at all the different rules someone has been taught and infer that.
But that's not the point, though. So the point here is that we do something.
Yep.
So once again, this is how it's similar to the logic stuff we were talking about. Because we start off with saying there's a practice. There's something that people do. Like they add, and they say things like 2 plus 2 is 4. And we go, yeah. And then you say things like 2 plus 2 is 5. And we go, no, critical race theory bad. Correspondence theory good. And we run around, and we have all kinds of stuff like that going on. People do this, and they agree. And there are hardly any sociologists haven't gone to some strange part of the world, found a tribe of people who say, 2 plus 2 equals 36. And we go, interesting. No, people, when they do math, seem to agree 2 plus 2 is 4, sort of on firm. And then we have theories of it and so forth. But the arithmetic comes first. The formal stuff comes afterwards. And knowing that if you have 2, then if you take 1 away, there's only 1. And all that basic arithmetic stuff is just what people do. Then you go to school and you learn, there's a thing called plus and a mathematical function called addition that this represents. There's these numerals that represent these things called. Then you start learning all this theory. But you could do the math before that. You could add 1 and 1 and you knew it was 2 before you went into the school and learned about plus signs and all that stuff. So you were doing it already, right? And normally we don't add very large numbers. I don't know what, 1 Googleplex minus 100,000 is. I'd have to so those type of numbers we don't often compute. We compute up to a certain finite range. So, okay, so the question is, now we picked an arbitrary number like 300, but really it could be any number. So it could be some very large number, but there's going to be some number past which no living human being has ever added numbers higher than that. So the point is perfectly general. But when we learn math, we don't learn some formal system and then try to internalize it. We are given some examples and then we do something. So it's not like how you're saying. It's rather that there's something which we do. We add various things, and then somebody comes to us and says, this whole time you thought you were doing this thing called addition that the logicians have defined in the following way, successor function, etc. But did you know that really you were doing this other thing called quaddition? And you go, I thought I was following this rule, applying this thing that I understood. And then this guy says, no, you may have been doing this other thing. So that's the way the puzzle's set up. So you can't really solve it by doing what you're doing, because we start by having a practice. Then somebody comes and says, here's another rule that's consistent with everything you've ever done. How do you know which one you've been following? And so you can't say, well, I just know because there's something that tells me that I know. Or if you do say that, you have to admit in the primitive normative facts, blah, blah, blah.
Okay, so we imagine 2 different universes, one where 2 plus 2 equals 4 and one where 2 plus 2 equals 3. And in each universe, there's 2 people. One is doing regular math, 2 plus 2 equals 4, and the other is doing qua math with 2 plus 2 equals 5 or whatever. In each of the universes...
But that's not qua math.
I'm just making up a new term.
Okay.
So just whatever math. So they're both doing different maths. One is doing 2 plus 2 equals 4. One is doing 2 plus 2 equals 5. And in each of the universes, one of the universes is a 2 plus 2 equals universe, and one of the universes is a 2 plus 2 equals 5 equals universe, one person is right in both universes, one person is wrong in both universes. And I would say the reason why one is right is because it's that way in the universe, and there's no greater facts of the matter. There's no greater why. There's no greater normativity. It's this is the way the universe is. That's the reason why. And there's nothing else to it. And so the reason we're doing 2 plus 2 equals 4 math is because that's the way it is in the universe. And we don't need any greater normativity there at all. And if in the other universe, the guy's doing 2 plus 2 equals 5 math, and he's right. He's right in that universe, and there's no greater reason. I just pressed a button.
But the real situation that we're trying to describe here is that the two universes, they agree that 2 plus 2 equals 4, and there's only 4 objects in their universe.
Well, no, I'm saying one universe is literally 2 plus 2 equals 5 universe. That's the way the universe works.
But I'm saying something different. So let's focus on what I'm saying and then compare them to what you're saying.
Okay.
So I'm saying there's 2 universes. In one universe, the guy says there's only, let's just say, 4 objects, and that's it. So in one universe, the guy says 2 plus 2 is 4, and in the other universe, the guy says 2 plus 2 is 4. So they agree on that. One universe, the guy says 1 plus 1 is 2. The other universe, the guy says 1. So they agree on all that. Okay. So now the question is, can these guys in those universes know, based on what they have done so far, that what they have been doing is addition and not quaddition?
No, I'm trying to bring this back into our conversation about logic, big L logic and little L logic.
So am I.
Okay. So if we take, where does the normativity come in? If there are 2 universes, and one is a 2 plus 2 equals 5 universe, and one is a 2 plus 2.
By the way, if philosophy equals navel gazing, then what the fuck does commenting on philosophy videos on YouTube equal hunt-tinkle-tink, homie? Anyway,
navel gazing and other navel gazing? It's like the what's it?
Yeah, meta navel gazing.
So if there are 2 universes, and they do have these 2 separate properties, one 2 plus 2 equals 5, one 2 plus 2 equals 4, and we're asking, why is one person right? I think the answer is because that's the way the universe is.
But we're not asking. So, but see, that's again the question is
well,
not.
Why should one person use this math over this math? That's right? Is that so? Yeah. Why should a person in this universe use this math and not this math? And I think the answer is because the universe is that way. And we get the exact.
So then there's a normative fact that's in that universe.
Normative fact
that they should use this logic.
I don't know. I wouldn't say so. I'd say that just
but you
is.
Just did.
Again, using the hypothetical part, I'm saying this universe, it just happens to be the case 2 plus 2 equals 4. And in this universe, it happens to be the case 2 plus 2 equals 5. Either person in either universe could use whatever math they want. I don't care. But
look, whatever is true out there, what we're talking about is something in here.
Yeah.
And so you said you don't think so. The quus and plus example is like, can you know? The skeptic comes and says, you don't know. There's no thing you can point to that will answer the question, which one of these 2 things were you doing, quus or plus? And because of that, there is no fact of the matter about which one you were doing. Because if there's nothing that answers this question, then there can't be a fact of the matter, because the fact of the matter would have answered the question. So that's the Kripke kind of argument, that there can't be a fact of the matter about meaning, intentionality in general, or whatever, of which this other stuff kind of is related to. But so in the 2 cases, right? That's I was trying to build up to that. In the 2 cases that I was talking about, they agree on all the facts, but there's some further claim about what they were really doing, which would only be answered by having behavior that they haven't done.
Yeah.
So by knowing how they would respond to 200 plus 300, which they have never been given. So there's nothing which they've done, thought, or anything in their histories which would differentiate these 2 things. So therefore, how could there be a fact of the matter about which one it is that they were doing if there's nothing that differentiates the 2 histories? So now you want to say there's something in reality out there that differentiates the 2 histories. The outside of the mind, there is some fact of the matter about whether plus or quus is the case. But that that's not the reason. But even if you say that, I don't think you've really answered the problem, because you haven't said why I should accept one over the other. So there's a factor there. Why should I care? You have to tell me, well, that there's something that's true, namely that I should respect the facts or something like that. I should reason in accordance with the facts, which is normative, which is a claim about how things should be.
Right, and I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say you should. I'd say do what makes you happy. I would say the should doesn't matter one way or the other.
Well, why should I do what makes me happy?
Because it makes you happy. Like, I don't think there's a law there. I think it's just you get dopamine good.
But that's not so I don't think I should do what makes me happy.
That would be fair. I would say go with that.
So you don't.
yeah. Like I don't.
But see, that's the problem. I think there are facts about what you should do. You don't.
Yeah.
And the whole discussion of logic is about, are there facts about what you should do? And the laws of logic say, yes, there are facts about what you should do. What you should do is reason like this, reason this way. And you want to say, no, there are no facts about what you should do. There's just, we do, and then we try to describe what we do. But there's no facts about what we should do.
I think that would be accurate.
Part that I think is where I'm on the side of the precept, and I'm not really, for the new people, I'm not really on their side, because I don't agree with their answer. But the way in which I'm on their side is that I think an answer to this question should be given. I don't think that you need to invoke a god or any spooky thing like that. But I certainly don't think that you can get away with saying what you're saying as an answer to the question and still think that logic is serious and that arguments are getting at something, and that, but answering the way you answering it, just the religious people are just going to have scored a point on you because they forced you to say that you can't really do what they are talking about unless you have something like what they're talking about. And I reject that. I want to do what they're talking about, have like there be facts about what's right, reasoning, rationally wise, without there being some God that grounds it. And to say, well, there aren't these normative facts is to give up the whole game, is to admit they're right, in my opinion. I mean, that's why I'm motivated to have this discussion with you, is because I don't want to give that debate up. I want to say, fuck you guys. We can have real logic, real rationality, and still know God.
Well, I think that's two different things. So I think those are two different claims. One is that if you grant their argument, then you're accepting that you need a God to have normativity. But I don't think that would follow from just saying you don't need normativity. So I don't think you need normativity.
No, what I'm saying, what I'm saying is that I agree that we need something that grounds normativity, but I disagree that God is a good ground for that. But you don't think you need anything that grounds it, and that's where I think that's where our triangle would intersect with them.
Yeah. I don't see the need to ground normativity, so I don't see that as a requirement, and I don't understand from your perspective why you do, and that's the part I'm struggling with.
Because if I'm a precept and I say, Tom, you need Jesus. You need Jesus, Tom. You don't know nothing, Tom. You need Jesus. Get Jesus, Tom. You need some fucking Jesus. And you say, no, I know lots of stuff. I say, no, you don't. No, you don't know nothing. You say, yes, I do. I know lots of stuff. Here are the reasons why you should accept my view.
Well, I would never say that. So I would never say, here are the reasons why you should accept my view. So,
but that's what arguing is. You give reasons, and then people, try to reason based on the evidence, to have their beliefs line up in accordance with the evidence, according to certain rational principles. The question that we're asking today is what justifies those rational principles, and that's just back at the start of it again. You can't just say what justifies the rational principles is reality, and I say, well, why does it justify them? And you say, because reality. And I say, but how does reality justify them? And you say, well, there's reality. But yeah, I agree there is reality, but then you could have all kinds of why, so so my point was, you argue with the precept, you say you should accept my position. They say, no, I shouldn't. You say, well, look, if you agree with this, then, presupposition is false. Presupposition, whatever the fuck they call it. Presuppositionism.
Presuppositionism.
That is it? Presuppositionism. They say, yeah, I agree with you, but presuppositionism is not false. You say, but you agreed with me that if you accept this, then it is false. And they say, yes, of course I agree with that. And I do accept that thing you said, but I just don't see why that should get me to conclude that my view is false.
Yeah, the answer
answer is they made a mistake because they're rejecting modus ponens. There's a rule that says you should reason this way, and they're failing to do it. So it's as though they were trying to execute a high jump and just doing it in the wrong way or something like that. They're just performing something that is not in accordance with the rule that governs the performance of that thing. And the way you're talking, you can't I mean, anyway, yeah, that Darth guy, I would love to debate him if he knew what a debate was. And he actually was a destroyer of worldviews. I would love to have my worldview destroyed, but just calling people stupid is really my thing.
I made a mistake. It's presuppositionalism. Presuppositional.
Anyway, so the whole point that I'm trying to make is, if you want to argue with someone and you give them an argument and they accept your premises but reject your conclusion, but your argument is valid, then there should be some fact of the matter about whether they're making a mistake or not, and whether they should agree with you or not on the basis of the reasons that you've given them, which they said they accept. But what you're saying right now is basically no, there isn't. There's just facts which describe whether they will or won't accept it, but not a fact about whether they should accept it.
Yeah, so I would say that when they say you can't know anything about Jesus, I say I know I exist without Jesus, and they say you're wrong, and I say I'm right. I'm saying that is simply a description of 2 + 2 = 4. If we take 2 rocks over here and take 2 rocks over here and put them together, it's going to be a fact of reality that's going to equal 4 rocks. And so
but that's not what 2 + 2 = 4 means, right? 2 + 2 = 4. What that means is that necessarily that's the case. Not just that on this instance is the case, but that it cannot fail to be the case, that it must be the case. Same with modus ponens. Modus ponens says it will never, ever possibly even be a case where you have if P then Q and P being true, but Q false. Can't happen. Impossible, bro. So it's not just, you can't simply say, here are 2 objects, here are 2 objects, therefore 2 + 2 = 4. That's not what plus means. Plus means necessarily, like mathematically. And mathematics, by the way, for those who are following along, mathematics in this sense doesn't really describe physical objects. It describes numbers and relations between them. It just so happens that's lucky for us that it lines up and can be useful for talking about those things over there. But mathematical claims are supposed to be necessarily true, unless you think, like maybe you said already that you are fine with it being the case that 2 + 2 = 5 tomorrow, and I'm not okay with that. So there should be something about reality which guarantees that that's not the case.
Right. I would say that I'm totally fine with 2 + 2 = 5. I'm totally fine with rejecting all laws of logic. I think that the reality itself, the way it is, regardless of what it is, whether it is logical or not.
But you can't reject all laws of logic, just like you can't accept any new laws of logic.
Right. I can't, my brain can't, but my epistemological limitations tell us nothing about ontology. So if that is ontologically the case, my epistemological limitations are nothing. They just don't matter at all. So I think that the ultimate authority there is the way reality is. I don't think there is a further justification. The way reality is, 2 + 2 = 4. So math is really describing 2 rocks + 2 rocks = 4 rocks. And there's something in reality that makes that the case. And math is nothing more than just describing that thing. I say the same about logic.
Yeah, but that's not what math is. I mean, math is so in one sense, math is a formal system defined in terms of a set of axioms, which can be defined in terms of set theory, but in simpler terms like, piano axioms or Robinson arithmetic, or various forms of it. But the fundamental idea is the successor function, which doesn't say anything about physical objects at all. It just says there is an x such that x is a number. There is an x such that x = 0, and that 0 is not the successor of any number. And that for all x, if x is a number, then there is a successor to x. And then you define the successor function as the successor of x equals x + 1, and arithmetic follows. So that's not about rocks. That's about reasoning from a set of axioms to what it is you can conclude from those axioms, which is why the whole endeavor of logicism initiated by Frege came into existence. The idea was that, math is logic, basically. And some people think that failed. Other people think it's more complicated.
Russell's paradox.
Well, Russell's paradox simply shows that there's some kind of issue right there. There's some interesting, anyway, I don't want to get too far. That's already a whole different rabbit hole. There are people who think you could sort of revive some of the important aspects of logicism. Crispin Wright is a philosopher who's done a lot of important work in this area. Anyway, so he's an interesting philosopher too. He likes to go on these long like mountain hikes for like months, where he hikes across the Himalayas or some shit and like thinks about logic and like comes back with a book or some shit. I don't know. It's kind of cool. Anyway, so I got distracted now.
So what would be the problem with saying math and logic are nothing more than 2 rocks plus 2 rocks equals 4 rocks, and then we do a lot of abstract stuff that just isn't there? And we add that to the math and say, this is math too, but it's really not. Math is a universal, necessarily the case that 2 plus 2 is 4. Like, no, we just made that crap up. It's really just, there's 2 rocks, 4 rocks. That's the way reality is. And we've just made up a whole bunch of silly language, abstract stuff to go along with that.
You could say that. But then there are people who disagree with you. So who's right? I mean, so anyone could say whatever the hell they want. The question, that's the whole question we're asking is what's the right way? What's correct? And there should be some facts of the matter there. Take Cantor's proof about infinity and all that stuff. People were talking about infinity earlier, and it's kind of not very clear, so I say that up. But anyway, Cantor tries to show that there are sets that are infinitely large that are of different sizes, that the real numbers are infinite, the rational numbers are infinite, but the rational numbers are larger as a set than the real numbers. And then there are sets even bigger than that. And in fact, it's a whole, even worse, a whole fucking hierarchy of infinite sets, each infinite, but larger than the ones behind it. And we never really get to infinity itself, right? That's what mathematicians or some mathematicians would say. We don't really understand the concept of infinity itself. We have various formalisms that capture some aspect of it. And that's sort of what I've been trying to say about logic too. We have formalisms that capture some aspect of what we're doing when we're reasoning, but the thing we're talking about is reasoning. The same is true with mathematics in the abstract sense. I mean, go and tell. I mean, there is an actual whole debate in math about, finitism and whether infinitary mathematics is useful or disconnected from reality, or whether infinite sets in reality exist. Like, is there an infinite distance between me and my computer screen? Some people would say yes, some people would say no. So it's not clear, but certainly clear what the math is of the infinitary distance, if there is one, et cetera, and so forth. So the question that these mathematicians are asking are very often, the continuum hypothesis, like deeply mathematical questions, are completely unrelated to the physical world, it seems. Like, is the set of infinite numbers that we call the rational numbers the next set in the order of infinite series after the real numbers, or is there one in between it? That's the continuum hypothesis. The continuum hypothesis is that, in fact, the next one is the rational numbers. It turns out that in set theory, you can prove that it is or isn't, depending on what axioms you choose. So again, we arrive at this fundamental question, which is, which axiom should we choose? Take the axiom of choice. Should we accept it or not? Why not? So if you want to say, look, it's just practical, I don't know. Mathematicians seem to think these things are real and that they're interacting with them. Constructivists seem to think, no, we just build these in our mind, and if you can't construct a model, then we don't have, we don't take it seriously. How did that project go again? Oh, did they take over math? Oh yeah, I don't know. Are the Platonists still in charge of mathematics? You tell me. So I'm not sure what the right answers are here. Obviously, I don't know. I'm not a mathematician. I'm a philosopher. I don't know shit. That's my job description is. I know jack shit about all trades instead of jack of all get it. Yeah. But the question that we're asking is about reason. It's about what goes on in here and whether we should accept certain inferences in that system. And mathematics defined in the way that I'm talking about it is about that stuff. That's why Russell's paradox is a problem. It's not a problem for apples and tables and chairs. It's a problem for the idea that you could form a set out of any collection of objects you want, or in other words, a certain axiom of set theory. It's a problem for that.
A set of all sets that are not members of themselves, a member itself.
Well, that's the specific example. That's a problem that shows that kind of unbounded set construction ends up with a Yeah, but there are many paradoxes in logic. I mean, you go back, the barbershop paradox is one of my favorites. Anyway, no one cares. The point is that there are lots of paradoxes in formal systems. But even like Gödel's proof, you can think of like, Gödel's proof, what does it show? Some people, the incompleteness proof, some people think what it shows is that there are truths which you can't prove. Okay, because for instance, take the sentence, this sentence is not provable. In the formal system, you can't prove it, but we can see how it's true, right? You can't prove that it's true in any form. That's Gödel's idea, is that you could take the sentence, this sentence is not provable, and convert it into some mathematical sentence that basically says like 5x squared plus 9x
Gödel numbers.
Yeah, exactly. So you just make it, define it in some code. You have some mathematical sentence, which you should be able to compute the answer to. But really what you're computing the answer to is this uncomputable thing, so you can't compute it. So the formal system can't ever answer the question, yes or no, true or false, is this sentence is unprovable, true or not. But we can tell by looking at it that clearly it's true. It's not provable. So some people think that shows that, what we're doing when we reason, it can't be captured by a formal system, because we can transcend the formal system and see it from outside. So therefore, how could we be reasoning with a formal system? Because you can't see from outside of the system you're reasoning from within. So, I mean, I wasn't using the Gödel examples to start this conversation, but ultimately it's like all on the same idea, that reasoning, rationality is one thing, and then there are theories of it and how it works. But what the question is why does it work? What justifies it? And I get what you're saying is, so maybe nothing. In which case that would be a point against, in my view, a point against my side. If that were really true, if I really thought that were true, then I would think that there had to be some kind of spiritual spooky shit going on.
Well, could it be both? Could it be like some things like 2 + 2 = 4 because 2 rocks and 2 rocks equals 4 rocks, and then from that we make up a whole bunch of other stuff that leads to these other things like unicorns.
Oh, by the way, if someone's asking if I'm an atheist, the answer is yeah, totally.
So there's about like the continuum hypothesis or whatever. Like the continuum hypothesis could be a unicorn. It's just a fabrication where there's these things that are made true by reality, and we've just inferred this other stuff that there isn't made true by reality. Reality doesn't make this true, and that's why we can't answer it. Could it be the case that there are some things in math and logic that are made true by reality, and other things that we've added onto there that aren't made true by reality?
Well, how do you know which is which?
You don't.
Yeah, bummer. I mean, look, that's the whole point that we've been having, is that the whole discussion we've been having is about, in another way you could put it, is about rational intuition, being compelled, like the way I feel when I think about the cogito, I think therefore I am. How could that be false? Like, it's impossible. Like when I think about that, I just feel like if you understand that sentence, there's just no possible way it could be wrong. It's like there's something about it that, like, when you think about it, you're forced to believe that it's true, not because you kind of look at it and go, that's nice, but like you think about it and it goes, accept me, and moves into your head, and you go, but I don't want to accept you. What about this? What about that? And it says, I command. There's a force, a feeling of like, I can't deny that this is true, except on pain of like looking silly or feeling ridiculous. If you say, well, of course I could not exist right now, and I wonder if I exist. What? No. If you really are serious and you take it serious, you're forced to accept, yeah, all right, cool. There's something I like that in logic and math, I feel, and I think other logicians. I mean, I'm not a great mathematician. I always joke that I was good enough at math, just good enough at math to know that I wasn't good enough at math to do what I wanted to do with math. And so I joined philosophy and was like, I'll hang out with the people who don't know math. Turns out they actually know a lot of math, fuckers. So I got tricked. But anyway, I've always liked math. I've always gravitated towards math. I've always enjoyed thinking abstractly as opposed to concretely. Like I always tell this story. This is a non sequitur, but since I'm telling it, when I was like a preteen, I found out about nuclear power. I was like obsessed with it in the 80s. I was like, it's fucking so cool. We're splitting an atom. Like, this is fucking gnarly, dude. Yes. And I went to the nuclear power plant by where I lived, Diablo Canyon is called. And I learned about nuclear power, and I was literally horrified. I literally like almost started crying. I was crushed. I was just like broken. And like something inside me just broke that day. And because what I found out was that we were splitting the fucking atom, dude, to boil water. That's what I found out. That these motherfuckers, they took the greatest knowledge of human beings ever achieved, and they use it to boil water, to turn a turbine, to do the shit we did 100 years ago. So after that, I was just crushed. I was like, this isn't cool. It's just a fancy way to boil water. I don't like practical anything. I want to live in the abstract realm and think about only pure things that are contaminated with all this water boiling crap. And I mean, that's obviously, I'm joking, but I really was like, it was really disappointing for me. I felt the same way about cell phones. I was like, what? It's fucking radio. It's radio, dude. It's just a fancier algorithm computer program. Anyway, okay.
I can imagine a caveman like, we discovered this awesome thing called fire. It's the greatest invention anyone ever has, and you're using it to boil water? Come on.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's got, I mean, well, no, it's not it's like if someone told you, we found the form of heat and we're harnessing the pure form of heat, and then you found out they found fire. Like, that's not the form of heat. Like, they're not harnessing the power of nuclear energy directly from the atom. It's not like you're taking your electrical cord and plugging it into the goddamn atom. That's what I thought that they were doing, was like harnessing the power of the atom. No, they're just using it to boil water. Okay, anyway. So I forgot what the hell I was saying. Oh yeah, so the point is that like, I've always liked math, but I've always never, I'm not saying I'm a super mathematical genius. I'm not, obviously. My history shows that. But I know some of these guys, and I get the feeling that they see something that's real. It seems real. Like, it feels like when Gödel's constructing a proof, it feels like he's building something which I can see through the fog. Like it's over. I can see it. It's there. Like it's like I can climb around on it and go, aha, so this part's connected to that part. And I can see it from this angle. And oh, right, I'd never thought of it from over there. You could get to that same, it feels real. Now, maybe that's a mistake. Maybe it's an illusion that there's something there, this rational structure that I'm connecting to. Maybe that's an illusion. But that's what the rationalists of the world believe, right? That's what Descartes thought. And there's a half of me that likes rationalism. I'm not against, for today, I'm like being as hardcore as a rationalist as I can. But you know me, ultimately, I take various positions. I don't really know what to, but my ultimate position is, who the fuck knows? I teach at a community college. Don't ask me to do it. What the fuck? So, but I actually don't know. I'm not just joking. I'm not playing a game. Like, I actually think it's hard. But I do see the force of this line of argument that we are pursuing here, which is, if these rational structures are real, if there's something real there that's not merely psychological, then what accounts for it? How is it real? And if it were merely psychological, which, yeah, I could, in my other moods, when, on odd number Tuesdays when I'm an empiricist, I go, so maybe it's not real. Why should I, who knows? Why should these things be real? Who am I? It's like a flea on the back of a dog trying to fucking demand the reality to be a certain way. Like, who knows? So it could not be that way. But I certainly feel like if it weren't, there'd be, like, their worldview can make sense of something that is important to me. This idea that there are facts here, that there's something real and true about rationality, and that there's something objective about getting it right and getting it wrong. It's not accidental or a happenstance. It's not a merely accidental product of evolution that could have turned out in a different way. There's something important about it, which I feel like would be lost if we say the things that you said. And maybe then I just have to grow up and recognize reality is not the way I want it to be. But I'm just saying it would be like a cost. I feel like it would be a cost to have to say that. And if I can say all the things I want to say and still not say that there is a God, still be consistent and take rationality seriously, it's like my same position with consciousness. If I can take consciousness seriously and not be a dualist, I don't want to be a fucking illusionist, dude. I don't want to deny consciousness. I don't want to deny rationality either, because I think the view that you ended up with is something like an illusionism about rationality, that we feel like there are these deep things there that aren't. They're just kind of like, no, they're not really that deep. And not just, anyway, so you sort of see what I'm saying. It's like, yeah, I'm not saying this has to be right. Like I'm not a precept. Like, this is the only way that things could be. But I do think that if they aren't that way, then we don't know a lot of stuff, and we don't have the Plantinga argument that evolutionary, it undermines belief. And it's, anyway, it would be nice to not have to give up on these ideas and still like maintain a naturalistic worldview, from my point of view. That's the only reason that I thought this discussion wasn't.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I can totally understand where you're coming from. My contention is that I don't feel the same way. I don't have that feeling that you do, that we need that. And that's the part where I struggle with, because I don't feel the need to justify normativity. I don't feel that as being making a worldview better than another. I just can't have the feeling. I don't have the intuitive feeling that you do, which makes it hard for me to understand. So I don't see a problem with just saying math is 2 rocks plus 2 rocks equals 4 rocks. And we,
right. But do you agree that, because suppose you were colorblind and I was telling you that there was red and blue, and you said, I just don't see it. You show me these things and they look the same to me. And I say, well, gee, there's a lot of people who say they look different. I'm one of them. We see something different there. This one looks different. And you go, I don't get it. I don't see it. And I say, well, we sure would like to know what the difference between these two things are. And you say, I don't see a difference. And I say, gee, that's weird, because look at all those guys. They see the difference. I see the difference. So
yeah, it's absolutely important.
Why isn't this a version of that? Why aren't you kind of normativity blind or something like that?
Well, I think that's absolutely right. I think that I'm trying to explore the ideas with you so that I can try to see the difference that you're seeing, because I don't understand the argument you're making to know, like you said, there's a difference between red and blue, and I'm like, okay, I'm blind. I can't see this. You got to explain it to me in a way that can make sense, because I don't see the difference here. So
right. For me, that's the whole point, though. Since you don't see the difference, isn't the fact that there's a group of people who say they do good evidence, and you saying that you don't, not very
maybe
good.
I mean, I'm happy to grant it's possible for sure. I can't formulate it in my head in a way that makes sense to be able to. It's like, maybe that's my logic that I'm stuck into, and I can't process what that would even mean.
I just don't believe that that's true, because it's like saying, if you had no motivation to do anything, you would never do anything. So the fact that you do stuff shows you have motivation to do it. So the fact that you engage in reasoning and do it one way, not the other, shows unless we're just like rocks falling down the hill, and we're not really reasoning in the way that I think that we are. And no, this doesn't have anything to do with determinism. I'm not trying to sneak in any kind of libertarian shit. I'm not doing that. You could be fully determinist and accept everything that I'm saying and still want answers to the questions that I'm asking. You could be a compatibilist and still think these aren't. So I don't think that this has anything to do with like me saying you have to be free to be rational. No, what I'm saying is that suppose determinism is true and I'm determined to reason according to the laws of X. Well, why is that? Why should I be determined in such a way? Maybe there's no good answer to that question, but
why should you be determined? Is that a correct phrasing? Can I like read into that? Because when you ask why should you be determined, it's like
that way.
In that way. Like
so for example, the laws of physics it's very easy to imagine that they're different.
Sure.
F equals ma squared. F equals ma over r cubed. F equals m minus 3 plus a divided by 6/10 of 100,000th mil. You get the variations infinite, obviously, on F equals, that's just one equation. So you certainly could imagine all sorts of ways that the world had turned out in that way. So then you say, well, why is it this way and not that way? And then you go, it doesn't really seem like a good question, because it's not better to be one way or the other. F equals ma is just as good as F equals ma squared. Forget about fine tuning and all that crap, and just put that on the back burner and assume that we're not worried about, and we're not thinking in those.
Right. So I understand your analogy that it's much easier to conceptualize a difference between F equals ma universe with F equals ma versus a universe is F equals ma times 2, where it's very hard to conceive of a universe where 2 plus 2 equals 5, as opposed to one that 2 plus 2 equals 4 seems significantly better in one case.
Or suppose there was a universe where there was the law of logic, which was from the fact that A equals A, infer that A doesn't equal A. So suppose that were a law of logic in a universe governing the law of identity. So that's the law of identity. When X is equal to X, you are rationally licensed to accept that X is not identical to X. So something self-contradictory, in other words.
Yeah.
So, okay, that seems a lot harder than F equals 2 MA.
Sure.
And also seems like I could say you're getting it wrong, whereas in the other one, it doesn't seem that way. Hence normativity.
Yeah, that's where I would say I would say you're only getting it wrong if the universe really isn't like that. Because if the universe is really like that, then it's right and you're getting it right, whether you want to or not.
The universe could only really be that way if it was such the case that the universe was such that you should reason in this way.
Yeah, so that's because you added in the should part as a part of the law, right? That part is.
Well, that's because that's the way reality would have to be to make what you're saying work.
So like if there was a law that just X does not equal
So
X.
it's like this person in the chat is saying, genius tracks. The answer to why you should use the logic is you shouldn't unless you desire to comport with reality. That's false. That's absolutely false. As I've already tried to at pains many times say, lots of different logics will agree with reality close enough to get you by. So for example, the obvious analogy is Newtonian and quantum mechanics. Newtonian mechanics is in a sense false. It's not the whole story, but it's good enough to fly rockets to the moon. And so may be wrong logical laws. So comporting with reality is lots of stuff doesn't comport with reality in some sense, but gets you around in reality. Perfectly fine. And in fact, our visual system is a great example. It doesn't represent reality. In reality, there's all sorts of energy forms in this room right now that I'm totally insensitive to. Electromagnetic radiation, ultraviolet light, blah, radio waves, the whole fucking thing. So don't give me this shit about comporting to reality. The senses distort reality and perverts. They tell me like the wrong shit about what's out there. I don't know anything about the UV light, the electromagnetic radiation, the atoms and quark strings, whatever. Okay, so obviously our system is not set up to actually tell us about what's really going on out there.
Right, I got a question for you real quick. So let's say there is X number of people on Alpha Centauri, a planet in Alpha Centauri, and I want to, what should I believe? Should I believe it's an even number or should I believe it's an odd number? Now none of us are in the case.
What's on Alpha Centauri?
People, a number of people. There are X number of aliens on Alpha Centauri in the cluster, and you ask, what should you believe? That's an even number or an odd number? And I say, well, you should believe whatever comports to reality. Like, I don't know what that is. Neither of us have a way to know that, but the one we should believe is whichever one that is.
Yeah, why?
Why?
Yeah, why? Just a normative claim, so you reject normativity. So I have no reason to accept what you just said if what you say is true.
Right, so I'd say if you want to believe that which comports with reality, then whichever one does is the one you should believe.
Why? That's a normative claim, and according to you, I have no reason to accept any normative claim, so I have no reason to accept the thing you just said according to your own view.
Right, I would say that would be the, if you want to do this, then the reason that you should do it is because you want to.
That's a normative claim, and given your own view, I have no reason to accept it. So I reject the claim you just said. I do want the thing, but I don't think I should do it, the thing that will get me it.
Okay.
Why should I accept that? Why should I accept that? You know, Kant said, he who wills the end wills the means. Says you, motherfucker. Tell me why. Well, you have to assume some normativity, some fact of the matter that if you want X and if Y is a way to get it, then you should do Y. That's a normative claim. If you don't have any reason to justify normative claims, I have no reason to accept that normative claim. On your own view, you have no reason to accept that normative claim. That was a point I tried to make like 2.5 hours ago.
Yep.
But you haven't really.
Yeah, I still don't get it. Like, why do I need that? Like whether or not you choose
because you just told me if you want to comport with, if you want X, you should do Y because Y will get you X.
Yep.
I don't see any reason on your own view that you would ever possibly have to accept that claim. Except there's a normative fact in reality that this claim is true or something.
So yeah, like in my view, I don't see why that's a problem. Like I don't care whether you do accept it. I don't care if you want to accept it. I don't care if you should accept it. None of that matters in my. None of that has zero importance.
Is it true that if I want X, I should do Y? Is it true or not?
True. If I want X, I should do Y.
And
Is that
so?
true?
Let me rephrase it. If I want X, and if Y is a way to get X, then I should do Y. All other things being equal, and don't give me examples of like, oh well, if you're hungry but it's poisoned, you won't fucking eat it. Yeah, we know. All right. But all things being equal, if you want X, and if Y is a way to get X, then you should do X. That's a hypothetical imperative, but it's still an imperative, true? And imperatives are still normative.
Right. I would not say that statement is true. I don't say that statement corresponds to reality. I wouldn't say that statement would be true.
Then I have no reason to accept it.
So why is that a problem?
Hey, bro, I only accept things which are real. Sorry, homie. If it don't correspond to reality, I don't accept it. So the statement that if I want X and if Y is a way to get X, then I should do Y, that don't correspond. I don't chop, bro. So I don't accept it. See what I just did is I parodied your own argument to show how ridiculous it sounds. Wait, of course I should accept that. If I want X and if Y is a way to get it, then all things being equal, of course I should do Y. It's almost analytic. Well, it's like, how could you deny that it's true?
It's to say the statement itself is true, that if I want X, I should do Y. To say that that statement itself is true, that there's some like objective truth value to that statement, like by correspondence theory of truth, that it corresponds to something in reality. Like, no, it doesn't correspond to anything. It's just
right. Then I don't accept it.
No, I don't see why that's a problem.
I only accept things which correspond to reality. Remember that's
yeah. So I don't see why there's a problem with not accepting that statement, because saying like there's no objective.
Well, then you'll never do anything. That's why. What do you mean? That's the whole basis of practical reasoning. That thing you're saying you don't care about. The whole basis of practical reasoning are hypothetical imperatives about reasoning about how to get what you want, and understanding that if what you want is X, and if Y is a way to get it, and if everything else is the same or equal, it doesn't matter, then that's a reason for you to do that thing. You should do it. If I want to graduate from college, and if taking this class is a way to graduate, and everything else is equal, then if I have a reason to take this class, and you're saying no. You're saying
wait, no. So I'm not saying
an objective fact about reality.
I'm not saying it wouldn't be a reason. So I'd still grant it would be a reason.
But not saying that it's true then. So it being a reason is it being true.
It being a reason is it being true.
Yeah.
So I like chocolate ice cream, therefore I want to eat chocolate ice cream. And
therefore you should eat chocolate ice cream.
Therefore I should. I'm talking
about want. It's the should part that matters. It's the normative part.
Yeah. So I see that
if all you ever did was want, then I wouldn't be. That's a different point.
Right. So I see that I like chocolate ice cream. That's a true fact, and I'm going to get chocolate ice cream. That's also a true fact in the future. The I should eat chocolate ice cream. I don't see that as a fact. I don't see the should as a fact anywhere. I don't see that.
No, the fact is that you should do what you want.
I should do what I want.
Yes. What reason would you have for doing what you want if you didn't think that you should do what you want? For example, I can think of lots of cases where I want to do something, but I think that I shouldn't, so I don't. Like, for example, there's a hot girl over there. She's looking at me, but I think I'm married. I shouldn't talk to her. Or there's a piece of cake there, but I just had 3 pieces of cake, so I think I shouldn't eat it. But gee, it looks good. I want it. So there's lots of things where we want things, but we think we shouldn't. And sometimes, where we don't or whatever, but at least there are these cases. Shoulds are logical. That's the whole point, Clinton. The whole point here is that logic is normative. Saying that something is logical, saying you should reason in a certain way. You should accept something on the basis of some other thing. That's what logic is. Inductive reasoning is that way. Deductive reasoning is that way. The only difference between the two is that in inductive reasoning, the evidence that you're given is inductive evidence, and the conclusion you reach is probable. Whereas in deductive reasoning, the conclusion you reach is necessarily given, blah, blah, blah. But both cases, the claim that we're making is you should accept these on the basis of that. You should do this if you want that. Those are normative claims. So logic is normative. I would have thought ethics is normative. Ethics tells you what you should do. Or if you don't like that, you can distinguish between ethics and morals. And so I would say morals, there's something about what we should do. So there's a lot of shoulds here, normative stuff, which I want to assign truth values to, which on your view, you can't do.
Yeah, I could make up a way to do it hypothetically. If I could understand it, I could probably make up a way to do it, but I don't understand it. Like, I don't see any shoulds that I should apply any truth values to at all. All of the shoulds seem completely irrelevant to anything. Like, I
Have
like
you ever felt like, you said you would do something and then you don't do it, but then you sort of feel, what's the misunderstanding of being normative? I'm holding my breath, waiting to hear what my misunderstanding is.
Well, again, so I'm saying I don't understand enough to know.
No, not you. There's a clown over here in the chat saying I don't understand what normativity is, which is kind of hilarious.
Okay, so from my viewpoint, like saying I like chocolate ice cream, I'm going to get chocolate ice cream, or I should get chocolate ice cream. Like, of those two statements, the first two are true. The second one, there's no truth value. It doesn't have a truth value. Like, the I should eat chocolate ice cream does not have a truth value. That seems completely just made up, subjective. I think I should eat chocolate ice cream. That has a truth value. But saying I should eat or should go get chocolate ice cream itself would not have a truth value. It would only have a truth value.
Yeah, but that can't be right, because if you want chocolate ice cream, then you should get chocolate ice cream, given that you should do what you want.
I don't understand that.
Yeah, good one. This guy over here, can you give an actual argument about what normativity, what misunderstanding I'm making, rather than just talking on your ass over here, bro? Because it's kind of getting annoying, but yeah.
Which guy? I can ask him,
Genius Tracks in
Genius
the
Tracks.
chat. Says I'm bloviating and don't understand what I'm talking about, which maybe is true, but there's no evidence that's being offered. So I would love to know what it is that I'm misunderstanding.
Yeah. That's a fair point. Just give evidence to what you're claiming instead of just claim it. I don't like comments that do that all the time from people who claim you got this wrong, but then they don't explain how you got it wrong. Like, that doesn't help. But so exactly. I'm not following where the truth needs to be in that claim that I should get what I want. So, like, to me, I don't see any truth.
So suppose you just wanted something like, I want not to die. Okay. Yep. So what should I do about it?
Well, there's lots of things you could do.
Just having the want isn't enough. I mean, there's question about what I should do and how I should avoid dying and what would be good. What are good ways to avoid dying? So I suppose I say, look, what I want is not to die, but here's what I think I should do. I should become a bullfighter or a skydiver or a military combat officer. And you say, those don't sound like good ways not to die. I say, why not? I don't want to die. I'm trying to avoid dying as much as possible, but I think these are the things I should do.
Right. So there's a list of facts there's a fact that you don't want to die, and there's a bunch of actions that will increase your lifespan and a bunch of actions that will decrease your lifespan. And all of those are facts. And there's this extra thing of that you should do the ones that increase your lifespan.
Right.
I don't see any truth value in that part. I don't get why we should
well, then
want
why would I
value.
choose to do any one of those things versus any other of them?
You want it?
But just wanting it doesn't tell me how I should act. It just says that there's something that I would like to have. It doesn't tell me how I'm supposed to get it. So that's the point I was making about practical reasoning and hypothetical imperatives, which is that in order to do anything, you have to reason.
Right. You have to have a logical inference that like supports the fact that these will get you the life thingy, the more life thingy. You want the more life thingy. These will get you the more life thingy. And so you have to make a connection between those two things, like the dogs or mammals connection you made in the beginning.
Yeah. Exactly.
So
there should be some facts about what the right kinds of connections are and which ones what aren't.
So the right kinds of connections and the wrong kinds of connections. But do those need a should? Do you need a should in there? Can they just be the right kinds of connections and the wrong kinds of connections without the should?
What does it mean to be right?
Corresponds to reality.
But what's it corresponding to? Like, what's the real thing, which is being, so it's a bit like, think about facts. Like you guys love facts. Everyone loves facts. Suppose you think it's a fact that there's no free will. Okay.
Okay.
Which thing does that correspond to?
I would say the whole of reality. I'd say that like there are
But
no
the whole of
unicorns.
reality is just a positive thing. It's not an absent thing.
Right. So like say if I think there are no unicorns in reality, then that corresponds to every part of reality. There are no unicorns in any individual space in reality. Free will would be the same thing as a unicorn, a non-existing thing. So it's like,
Which fact is it which makes the sentence true?
which
physical thing is it? You're saying all the physical reality makes that sentence true?
yes, each individual fact in reality, when looked at, none of them have this value in it, and that's what makes it true. That is that itself a fact.
So in order to know that this is true, then you need to make an inference from facts which are there to their lacking in including in not including a particular thing.
Sure.
Right. So there's the problem where everything we've been talking about is going to show up again, because as soon as you have to make that inference, the question is what counts as getting it right, and why do it one way versus the other? So why shouldn't I look at the total of reality, examine every aspect of it, and conclude there are unicorns? I infer from the fact that no individual thing that I've examined is a unicorn to the belief there are unicorns. You say it doesn't comport to reality. How do you know? Because the evidence you're using assumes a certain kind of logic. An inference is made from these things not finding these things to their not being there. Whereas the inference I made was I didn't find them to inferring that it was there as a result of that. So one of us is making a mistake, the other one is not. And it is not about reality, because we both agree on all the facts that we can point to. This thing's not a unicorn, that thing's not a unicorn, this thing's not a unicorn. The difference between us is what we have inferred, reasoned our way to from the things that we were presented.
And I couldn't just say...
And you want to say one of those gets it right. But what reason do you have to believe that, which isn't going to invoke the same kinds of reasons and therefore not have given me a reason at all?
And it's a problem to say, like, imagine there is an omniscient being who has access to every single one of the facts, and he can check every single one of the facts, say no unicorns. And so we can know for the reality there aren't any unicorns, and that the fact.
I agree with you that both people see you're not taking the puzzle seriously. We both agree that there are no unicorns. That no individual object is a unicorn. We agree. So we draw up a giant list of everything that exists, you and me, and we agree on it, and we check it between us. We say, here's this list of all the things which are real, and we check it. We both agree. And then I say, aha, so there are unicorns. And you look at it and go, what? There are no unicorns. And I go, what? There are unicorns. Look, this one isn't, this one isn't, this one isn't, this one isn't. So there are. And you go, no, you're getting it wrong. This one isn't, this one isn't, this one isn't. So there aren't any. Notice the so part, that's an inference.
Yep.
But we agree on all the facts. This one isn't, this one isn't. George is not a unicorn. Edna's not a unicorn. But we disagree on what we take that evidence where it points to, what we should infer from it, what we should reason our way towards on the basis of that evidence. So if there is a fact of the matter, it's got to be a fact about whether I'm right or you're right about this kind of case, about whether you should infer from that kind of case that there are no unicorns, or whether you should infer from that kind of case that there are unicorns. And that's a matter of what inference is, not a matter about what facts, reality there are. It's a normative fact about what you should do, how you should proceed on the basis of all that stuff that we just agreed about.
What inference is. So suppose I said inference is just finding patterns in those facts and nothing more. The inference itself can't be an extra fact. It has to be in those facts.
Yeah.
So if inference itself is in those facts, it's one of the facts, and then we can check the list of facts and know which inference is correct.
So we have a list of facts. The question is what we should infer from those facts. If the correct, what you should infer from those facts is not a list included in the facts, then how do you know what to infer from them?
Right. So obviously if it wasn't there, then you couldn't do it. But let's say it was. Let's say there is a fact that is that you should infer this. That is one of the facts.
Then that's a should fact. And I said already that is fine if that's what you think. But it's a fact which is should. It's not, it's normative fact about what should be done.
Okay.
Namely, you should reason like this, like your way, not my way.
Yeah, I'm still thinking I just don't need the shoulds. I'm still not seeing a problem with.
Well, then you just can't. I mean, then you should just agree that there are unicorns and that there is a God, and that I believe. Look, I believe there's a God because I've examined all the evidence and I found that there is no evidence for God. So on the basis of that, I have this rational rule that says on the basis of no evidence and for the existence of the thing, it's called universal existence. So therefore God. And you're going to say, no, that's not a good rule. You shouldn't reason that way. And I'm going to go, well, there's no shoulds. Fuck your shoulds, dude. I'll reason however I want. There's a God. Bow to my God, motherfucker. You're going to say, no. You're reasoning wrong. That's bad evidence. So the game you're playing, if you want to play it, there better be some facts about what counts as evidence and what you should do with it. And it can't just be given to you in a purely descriptive way. It doesn't make sense. Because if it's given to you in a descriptive way, you won't know what to do with it. Because the system will just sit there. It's like an engine that's not started. If I just give you an engine but don't ignite it, nothing happens. So reason is the ignition. It's the thing that runs the formal system. We take the formal system, we run it, and we make certain inferences. But we were doing all that before. Non-formally.
I just don't understand it all here. Like for me, the ignition is emotion. It has nothing to do with reason. Reason is just one of the rocks falling and nothing more than one of the rocks falling. And our ignition is the emotion part. And I don't.
But then there just is no good reason to accept anything.
No good reason.
Good reason to accept what you just said.
Yeah. So that would be true. I would say that there's no good reason because reason they're only emotional. There are emotional reasons and nothing else. The facts don't include motivation or intentionality or shoulds. None of all those are just nothing but emotions.
In science, who cares about science and differentiating imagination from reality? There's no reason to do that. I shouldn't do that. I don't care about that.
Yeah, I would agree. There's no
objective. There is no difference between imagination and reality. How about that? Zing. You shouldn't believe in that distinction. There are no shoulds. So I deny the distinction between imagination and reality. I don't accept it. I deny the cogito. I don't think you should believe that you exist because you have this emotional feeling that you exist. Oh, poor confused fuckers. You just have these feelings that you exist. That's not logic, guys. That's feelings. I mean, come on. All that stuff's ridiculous. That's not what there's more to it than that. Or else if that's all there is, then that's laughable. I don't get why it's laughable.
I'm not following here because I see all that motivation stuff is just.
We just aren't serious creatures. What do you mean?
Well, I'm not finding the connection here. So humans don't matter at all to reality. They have zero value, none whatsoever. No humans existed. Poof, gone, fine. We don't need it. And I'd say if all humans didn't exist, reality would be just fine there without us.
And the fact and then there would be no logic.
Yeah. Logic is made up by humans, and I'm fine with that.
No, logic is something humans do. They reason.
Yeah. Okay, that would be fine too. That's fine too. So there's no reasoning, and that's fine. Right. And now you introduce a human, and we have this reasoning thing we do. And this reasoning thing seems to be just a process that happened by other processes in this non-human rock stuff.
Correct.
And I don't see why we need the shoulds. The shoulds just seem to be an emotional thing that was added there. Like if we didn't have the emotion, we wouldn't do any. We would just be like an engine that didn't start, like what you mentioned earlier. So if there's no
reasoning, at least. What are you talking about?
I don't think so. I don't think we'd be able to reason without emotion either. I think that
of course we would. Computers can reason, and they don't have emotion. They reason perfectly well. And oftentimes they reason better than we do, and differently than we do, since they follow logic more strictly speaking than we do, since we programmed it into them. But I don't think that computers are conscious or have feelings. I don't accept any of that. But they certainly are intelligent to some extent, and they reason In the following sense, if you have a self-driving car and you tell it that you want it to go to Expo Center, then it will figure out a way to get from where you are to Expo Center. In other words, it will solve a problem, and etc. And if you don't want to say that this thing is reasoning, then because it's not following the rules, but they're just programmed into it, then of course you shouldn't say that about us either. If we're just following the rules that are programmed into us, as opposed to following them on the recognition that they are the correct ones, which is all the stuff we were talking about before. So that's why I brought the self-driving car up. So if you want to deny that the self-driving car is reasoning, and yet we are doing exactly what that thing is doing in the big scheme of things, then we aren't reasoning either.
Well, so I would compare the computer to your dog example, that the computer is just doing what you've trained it to do or something. Like if you're saying the computer is itself doing reasoning, where is the should in that?
Well, the should is that we built the rules into the system because we think those are the correct rules. So that, I mean, that's the idea that the precepts have. With computers, it's true though. With us, we're the designers. We built them. We built certain rules into the system because we think they mirror the correct rules. Boolean algebra, we think, captures something important. By the way, most undergraduates hate the paradox of material implication, if P then Q being true when both parts are false, or when the antecedent is false. But computers work on that logic. They love it. They understand it, and they, do all the things they do with that. So we built the rules into the system because we think those are the correct rules. And the precepts think that's the way it is with us and God. Like God built the rules into us because God knows the right rules. So at least with the computers, that's right. We're the creators. We designed them to follow these rules because we think we know the rules. But if you think thereby the computers are not engaging in reasoning when they run these programs that we wrote, then why would you think we are engaging in reasoning when you were running the program that nature wrote in us? It seems like you have to say the same thing in these cases.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing.
What? And by the way, before you start hating on computers, automated proofs are getting very sophisticated, by the way. There are now mathematicians will just kind of, they're lazy. They'll toss off a half a page of a proof, but not fill in the details. And they'll say snarky things like the rest is left as an exercise for the reader. You're like, oh, turns out it's like 40 pages of really detailed hard shit that's left for the reader. You can put that into an automated proof system now, and it will spit out the missing in betweens. You're telling me that's not reasoning? Then what is it? It's applying these rules that we think it's automated reasoning. Notice I didn't say it's the same as ours. I said it's a kind of reasoning. It's automated. Yeah. It's automatic reasoning. Reasoning, it's a kind of rational process that we took and built into this machine over here. But it's following these rules that we designed. And put into it. And we are the reason, if someone asks why are these the correct rules, we will say, I will defend Boolean algebra. Ask me why the conditional should be treated that way. I'll tell you, not the computer. It's me that knows, not it. So if that's the way we are, ultimately, if evolution built us and there was just a program running and we don't understand the rules, but we just run on them or something like that, then I don't think we're really reasoning either for the same reasons that the computer
Yeah, I would say the computer is really reasoning in the same way that we're really reasoning. I think we're the same.
Well, then we aren't. So earlier you said the computer. So what I said ultimately was, whatever you say about the computer, you have to say about us.
Sure.
So a lot of people in the chat were saying, oh, the computer's not really reasoning. So I was saying, if it isn't really reasoning, then neither are we, because we're doing the same thing.
Yeah, I'd say we're doing the same thing, for sure.
But I say we're not.
And the difference is?
The difference is that I know the rules and understand why they're correct, but the computer doesn't. That's the difference. I'm following the rules because I understand them and intentionally and purposely try to align my reasoning with the rules because I understand and respect them in a certain way. I see that they should be followed. And that was Kant's idea about the categorical imperative, that but he was trying to take, in my opinion, he was trying to take an idea that we have from logic and apply it to ethics. The idea in logic is that we feel compelled to follow these basic rules of inference. And when you recognize what they are, you recognize that you should follow them. Like maybe you've been doing it your whole life, you never thought about it. But as soon as someone tells you what modus ponens is, you see why it's good to do that. And it's the person who says, yeah, but I don't know why I should do that. You told me there's this rule. Maybe I've been following it. Maybe I haven't. I don't really care. That person seems to be missing out on something.
Yeah, it's a little bit past 2, so I wanted to make sure that if you need to go.
Shit. Yeah. I should. I mean, this conversation is really interesting, and
Oh, yeah, but we just got to such a great point too, because I want to say I think we're just like the computer. If the computer got an extra program where it's trying to analyze the things we programmed into it, and it said it should now obey the rules that it's discovering that it's inherently following, I'd say we're doing the same thing. But I don't think there's any unnecessary should there. I think it's just discovering the things about itself and saying, I really like these, we should do it.
Yeah, exactly. But if someone asked the computer, like, why should you reason this way as opposed to the other way, the computer would say, I don't know, but we could come in and say, this is why, because these are the correct rules. And so that's the difference between us and the computer. So in the precept world, which again, I'm not a precept, I'm an atheist about religions, but I'm agnostic about, do we live in a simulation or is there design or something, just for people that are questioning my credentials in the chat over here. But the precepts, what they think is like, yeah, you want an answer to this question. The computer, we're like the computer. And someone comes to the computer and says, why are you following this rule and not that one? The computer says, I don't know, but there had better be a good answer and we can come and provide the answer. So they think God is like the guy who could provide the answer, why this rule is the good rule. I don't believe that. I think we could provide a different answer, which you haven't even asked me about in this whole discussion. Like, what do I think the answer is? You haven't said that.
Well, I think you said it a few times.
You don't need an answer. So that this whole discussion is, do you need an answer? Not what is the answer. But the precepts and I, although we disagree about what the answer is, I reject God as the answer. In fact, I think even if there was a God, it wouldn't really work for the thing they want it to. The precepts, they don't understand their own question in a way, I'd say, because God doesn't. Anyway, okay. So maybe I should talk to a precept someday and they could refute me. But what we want is an answer to the computer's question. Why are these the good rules? And if the answer is there's no answer, it just happens to be that way, it might have been different, then you have lost a battle which puts you at a disadvantage against the opponent, which doesn't mean you've lost the war, atheism lines, but it's certainly have you been beaten back to a position where I don't think I would want to be, admitting that logic is willy-nilly, could change tomorrow, isn't serious, made up by humans. All these problems we've been discussing seem to suggest that's not the case, but I don't think you need to solve the problem by invoking a God, but you need to say something about what the laws of logic are, which includes normativity. And just saying, no, there's no normativity, just seems to me you're not going to do it. You won't do anything. You'll know all the facts, and then you'll sit there knowing all the facts. But why would you ever do anything with those facts? You're just going to have them. They're facts. Okay, but should I conclude from these facts that there are unicorns, there aren't unicorns? Should I conclude from these facts that we don't know if there are unicorns, that no one can know if there are unicorns? Should I conclude from these facts that the facts don't tell you, unless in the facts are included things about what you should do with the facts? So that's where we disagree, obviously, and we're just kind of going back and forth.
Yep.
But I don't really see how you've even addressed the question, except by saying that I think I can take logic seriously, but also deny that there is any such thing as logic and that we reason in any way. And yet I'm still going to say that, you should believe the things I say and I can refute your position. But anyone who believes you should just say, oh, that's cute, but also everything you said is false and is compatible with everything you said. So great. Yeah,
and I see like one of the facts of reality is this is the pattern which accurately describes reality, and the logic is the right one if it matches that, and that's just something that I arbitrarily say is the right one. You could pick a different one if you want.
But could you have that pattern without people?
Yes, I think that pattern is itself a thing that exists independently of any humans.
Yeah, exactly. So the patterns must include normative things then.
No, I don't think it includes normative. I think this is the fact. I don't
even know what a super chat is, by the way, Sully. So no.
A super chat is where they give me money and make a message pop up on the screen real big. So I just say there is just one of the facts about reality is these are the patterns that describe reality, and there's no normativity there. It's just that these are the patterns that describe reality. And if we're trying to create a logic, we're just trying to make a system that does that. And if it does,
but if all you did was describe reality, you wouldn't do anything.
You might not, but I don't think you need to do anything. It's still right
Sure
if it
you do.
does.
We do. We reason all the time.
Sure, we do, but we don't need to. I don't think that's a requirement at all. Like, I
Of
think
course it
that's
is. If you didn't reason, you wouldn't move.
uh, maybe, but I don't see why that matters to reality.
It
I,
doesn't. It's unless reason is a part of reality. So that's the whole point.
right.
If reason is a part of reality, then we want to say something about reason. If you want to just describe reason, then what you end up saying is it works in a lot of different ways. If you want to say sometimes it works right, then you have to say more than that. So you can't just describe these patterns and say, here are the patterns. Sometimes people say from all A's or B's, you can infer not A. Sometimes people say from all A's or B's, you can infer A. Sometimes people say from all A's or B's, you could infer no one gives a shit. And so that's the description. That's the actual description. People just do it a lot of different ways. So then if that's right, there are no laws of logic. There's just a bunch of different stuff that people do, but none better than the other, none objectively correct.
Yeah, I'm gonna need to think about that more to so if I can phrase it correctly. But I definitely think we gotta let you go because you're probably like way late.
Yeah, it is pretty late, but let me just try one more time. So like take someone like Jerry Fodor in the Philosophy of Mind. He wanted to argue like that the mind was purely syntactic, that there are no semantics really in the mind, that there's no meaning of the words in our mental language. There are just these things which can be individuated syntactically by their shape. So there's like squares and triangles, just literally just like shapes of things. But the laws of the universe have been set up in such a way that those syntactic things mirror transitions in what we would call semantic space. So there's a fact about if P then Q and P entails Q. And then there's some physical things here which are set up to kind of mirror that fact, and they're guided by it, right? The way they're set up here is determined by the way this thing up here is. So if that's your view, then what you can say is that the logical laws guide our thoughts in this way without us having to interact with them or something. That's what Fodor really, he didn't want these things to be in the mind, but he wanted the mind to be rational. So what he said basically was that the mind is set up causally to follow a causal path, which you could model in the state space of rationality or something like that, but really isn't. It's just this like physical state space of A causes B. It just so happens that all the cause and effects can be interpreted as if P then Q, P therefore Q. So that's a way of sort of trying to walk a line between the thing you're saying that there's no normativity and the thing I'm saying that you need to understand. So just to back off I'm going to push you as hard as I can and sort of be like, let's be friends again. There are a multiple set of views here, but I was really just taking this line because I was trying to impress on you that, and it hasn't worked obviously, but I'll try again later if you let me, that there's something here that the precepts are idiots, but not for the reason that you're saying. I agree that they have a mistaken view. And I don't want to be mean because maybe they're not idiots. Smart people could believe wrong things. I agree.
I'll try to set up a debate with you with one, and we'll see how long that idea lasts.
What I don't want is just a name calling. What I'd like is hear some arguments, but then I want to know why to accept those arguments. So anyway, the point though is that this is a long discussion. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope you'll have me back someday. But I gotta go.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. I'll let you go to your work that you need to do.
Yeah. All right. Sorry for going on and on. But I do think you should pay more attention to this because this to me it seems like an area where they get the better of you where they shouldn't. I still need to try and understand what that means. I still don't fully understand what it means that you need the normativity and the logic thing. I still don't get that. Even if you don't understand it, it's like if you want to do the perfect parity argument of their position, you need to understand their position.
I don't think they understand the position this much at all. But
yeah. Okay. I don't like being this mean. I mean, honestly, I know very smart people that hold things I think are just quackery. But that doesn't mean they're not smart. That's the problem is that logic doesn't tell you what to believe. It only tells you like how to get from one belief to the next, which is sort of another way of putting the whole thing we've been talking about. Logic is contentless. It doesn't make a claim about the world. It makes a claim about how you should reason about the world.
Yeah, I think that's
which is a claim about something in the world, namely reason.
Yeah, I think that's the part I would like to try to articulate better, is that the fact that you can go from one belief to the next belief could be an instantiation of something in the world that we just don't understand yet.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's just I would like it to be objectively true that we should go from this belief to that belief as opposed to the other
Yeah. All right.
one.
Well, great talking with you. I will let you go
Yeah.
and email you to set up another
And sorry I
time.
was mean to the guys in the chat. You know I feel guilty for talking shit. But
This is YouTube. We're allowed to be mean. It's kind of a normal
yeah,
thing.
I mean, those people that are trying to learn and think seriously about these things, they should be encouraged, not admonished. So I do apologize for. I mean, I would never act that way in a classroom. So why am I acting that way here? You know, sorry.
It's okay. We find it entertaining. I get more views, so I appreciate it. You should do it more
Yeah, no,
often.
it was all part of my plan to make this a dumpster fire so that you would get more views.
Exactly. I'll give you some table under the money, like pay you off.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
All right.
Peace,
see you later.
Later.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks to. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Full screen TJump. Damn it. Nope. I'll just stick with this one. All right, whatever. Thanks, guys. Thanks for showing up. Appreciate it. Thanks to Don Fullman for supporting the channel, as always. The Skeptics of Middle Georgia. Buy my mugs. Support me on Patreon and PayPal and stuff. All the normal stuff. What day is it? Today's Friday. So I have another one today later. 7 p.m. I got a debate on modern day debate on critical race theory. Let's see how that goes. Discord. Yep. Sully Discord. I gotta try to set up a debate with, what's his name? The nice precept. The nice precept who is on our Discord, and Richard. We can probably set that up and see if you can answer some questions. That'll be interesting. Is that how I do it? Just close that window. That'll work. Whatever. Oh, here we go. Maximize. That's how I do it. There you go. Now I have a big face. All right. Yeah, Doulos. That's right, Sully. Doulos. We can probably set up a conversation with Doulos and Richard. That'll be interesting. Darth Dawkins probably wouldn't be great. He'd just be yelling. But yeah. Yeah, still need to try and figure out, like, I think that... Yeah, I don't think we need the shoulds. I don't think we need the shoulds for anything. I don't think we need the shoulds. But I still don't understand why, the other position of why we would need the shoulds and why it's a bad thing to not have them. I don't get it. But thanks, genius. Well, the normativity, I think he just means is synonymous with should, genius. So when he says that we need normativity, he's saying that we need the should. Someone should use this logic and not that logic. And having that sentence have a truth value is what he wants in his epistemology. And I don't think we need in mine. And I don't understand why he needs that in his epistemology. Should we have shoulds? Exactly. Thanks, David. Good session. Yeah. Why are you even breathing? I couldn't stop myself from breathing if I wanted to. I think that emotion is the reason why I do stuff. Why do we need shoulds? Don't know. Normativity means you have the capacity to fail with respect to an aim or goal. Normativity, I think, is... Yeah, it's the capacity to fail. Like, if you have a way to fail, that means there's a way to succeed, and that succession has a truth value to it. You've succeeded at a truth value. There's some inference there. That inference thingy is the tricky part. How can you get to should without defining it? That's a good question, Mike. Good question. How can you get to should without defining it? I think the argument would be something like, we have this intuitive desire for A equals A, and that we feel like it's the case, and then that feeling is what we give the shouldness definition to. Well, CJ, we didn't actually get into his reason of why we should have the should. Definitely, I should ask him that next time. Yeah, Woody, definitely. I think we've had him on like 4 or 5 times. So there's lots of videos of him on my channel without the beard, though. He didn't have a beard. Define should. Guess I could try that. Define should. Because, yeah, I guess the way I would define should would be inherently based on correspondence to reality. Whereas how he would define should be based on whatever his answer is. Well, the precept argument, like just saying another mind grounds shoulds doesn't answer the question. It doesn't make sense to say that another mind would ground the shoulds. There's lots of reasons why precepts arguments don't work. Could you define morality and moral law? Like, I think morality is the common definition is just the principles that differentiate right from wrong. And I think what makes something right from wrong is correspondence to a law of nature. Isn't should an ought? Yes, should is an ought. How should you define should? Paradox. All right, guys, I'm going to get some food and start prepping for my debate tonight. Thanks for joining. Appreciate it. Shout out to Don Fullman at the Skeptics of Middle Georgia. Why buy mugs? Because they're cool mugs. Cool mugs, chair mugs. All right, I'll see you guys later.